both past and present. And I will ask if there are any apologies from councillors tonight. Councillor Iskander is an apology. That will be moved by Councillor McKenna. Is there a seconder to accept that apology? Seconded by Councillor Hesse. I believe Councillor Drury and Councillor Porteous are about to join us, so I'll put that. All those in favour? Against? Declare that carried unanimously. For the benefit of the citizens in the gallery tonight, we notify you at the beginning of meetings that these proceedings are webcast live onto YouTube and recorded there for posterity, and we let you know about that so that you're aware of the potential legal ramifications of comments that you make in the public domain.
Point of order.
Yes.
If you could let the residents know if they have a problem with what's on live stream, council will always
Okay.
if they say anything they're not happy with.
Okay, thank you for that. Councillor Passis has notified you that Councillor has the ability to take down comments that are considered defamatory or problematic. Okay, disclosures of interest, councillors. Are there any disclosures of interest? Councillor Kiat.
In relation to item 15, which is in relation to appointing an external legal panel, my sister works for one of the firms that has tendered. I'd consider it a non-significant, non-pecuniary interest.
Councillor Kiat is making a non-significant, non-pecuniary disclosure of non-significant, non-pecuniary interest for item 15. Are there any other disclosures? Councillor Stanmore.
Mr Mayor, I'm not sure if this is the appropriate time, but I would like to signal to all councillors that I'm putting forward an urgency motion this evening. Thank you.
That will be considered at the conclusion of the rest of the business as required under the Code of Meeting Practice. There's no further disclosures. Will someone move acceptance of Councillor Kiat's disclosure? Moved by Councillor Hesse, seconded by Councillor McKenna. All those in favour? Against? Declare that carried. Can I ask everyone to please stand for a moment of quiet contemplation? Please be seated. Before we move on to the official business, I have one very enjoyable task tonight, which is an acknowledgement of a local young person who has achieved a quite remarkable record, and that is Lachlan McIntyre, who's 11 years old, who's in attendance tonight. He's a student at Wilkins Public School, and he recently broke the Guinness World Record for the most consecutive pogo stick jumps with no hands. The previous record was 5,093, but Lachlan achieved 6,100 in a period of 54 minutes. Now, his parents asked him to come along here tonight because I'd agreed to present the official certificate to him, which is quite impressive. And they told him that they needed him to come along to the council meeting because they wanted to speak about the council rates. So I think he deserves an extra acknowledgement for being such a dutiful son that he went along with that. So he wasn't aware before arriving when I accidentally gave away the secret that he was going to be presented with his certificate tonight. Lachlan, could I ask you to come forward to receive your record? Here is the winning pogo stick, which is now broken from overuse. We might just try and do this in front of the players. Lachlan, congratulations. Thank you for your hard work. So we might just get one more with the pogo stick. You want to hold that? That's not good. Yeah, it's fairly out the way. Dad wants to take a picture. Yeah, come.
Thank you very much. The Climate and Renewables Plan has many good points, but it does not stress the urgency of our situation sufficiently. We are in an emergency and we should act like it. At one point today, Sydney's air quality was 11 times the hazardous level. Unfortunately, the plan also does not realise cost savings to council. When compared with business as usual, many of the low emissions alternatives would actually save money. Pertinent examples would include phasing out expensive gas from council operations and from homes and most businesses, and installing more PV. But I'm going to focus on the conversion of the council fleet to electric vehicles. ClimateWorks Australia is an independent, research-based, non-profit organisation. In 2018, they worked with the Municipal Association of Victoria to increase uptake of electric vehicles in local government fleets. They found that some electric vehicles on the market are already cheaper than petrol cars for fleet owners. The best savings are available for electric vans and minibuses, but there is a vehicle that is the same price or less over their lifetime for hatches, sedans and SUVs. That is so far everything except for utes. The reason electric vehicles can be cheaper over their lifetime is that fuel and maintenance costs are much lower. Electric vehicles also improve energy security, lower suburban noise pollution, and significantly lower air pollution. If local councils switch, it also improves the prospects for the future second-hand vehicle market. The federal government has rolled out a program to make it easier for local councils to transition their fleet, and this should be taken advantage of. I note that the fleet transition is listed as requiring further detailed costing on the agenda. Transitioning the fleet is an easy budget and emissions win and should be supported. Taking advantage of this and other low-hanging fruit should make the Inner West Council's emission-neutral target possible much sooner than 2025. Thank you very much.
Green of Lewisham.
Thank you. A little bit of parenting tag team tonight. My name's Rachel Green. I'm a resident of Lewisham. I'm also the Chief Executive Officer of Independent Community Living Australia. We're a disability and mental health service provider working here in the Inner West. We support people living with long-term serious psychiatric disability to live in community housing. I want to commend the Council on the strategy. I think it's a good piece of work, but there are some areas I think that need further attention. Specifically, I want to talk about adaptation, and that relates to what's going on right now. I suspect that the time that the document was drafted was perhaps before we were in this bushfire crisis, which is, as the RFS has been saying, unprecedented. So one of the things that I believe Council needs to consider and plan for now is public facilities, including open space and indoor space. There were situations in the last week where Marrickville residents were urging each other not to visit the Annette Kellerman Aquatic Centre because the smoke alarms wouldn't stop going off because of the smoke, and they couldn't shut the doors and keep the smoke in. Right now there are gastroenteritis outbreaks in the childcare centres because the children have been kept indoors all day long. If, as the RFS predicts, these bushfire seasons due to climate change will be longer and hotter, we can expect to need more indoor space, and we don't have it right now. If you turn your attention to community parks and areas in the Inner West, many of them are inadequately shaded for a future that is longer and hotter days. And we're looking at a future where mothers groups, children, there isn't going to be places where we can safely be outdoors. They don't make P2 respirators for babies. I think that we need to stop thinking of adaptation as something that happens in the future and start actually planning for it now. An audit of community facilities and how prepared they are for an inundation of community needing to spend more time indoors would be something to consider fairly urgently, I would think. Air purification at schools. So right now, as I said, the daycares and the schools are keeping all the kids indoors. That doesn't necessarily mean the air quality is any better. We're seeing in Sydney right now, some schools are sending kids home. That limits the liability on schools, but it doesn't necessarily make it any better. Households are inadequately prepared to adapt to a future that includes more summers that look like this. Air purifiers, just in case you're curious, are sold out across the whole of Sydney. You can't buy them anywhere unless you can afford the Dyson. I want to talk specifically about the part of the strategy that looks at options to support households to introduce solar. I think that could be far more aggressive. Simply waiving the DA fee won't be enough to get households thinking about it, planning for it now. In particular at ICLA, many of our buildings are owned by Land and Housing Corporation. I think that a partnership with them on public housing and adaptation would be important to look at, noting that many of the buildings in the inner west actually don't support solar installation until you replace the roof. So supporting the community to transition will take more preparation. I think that we need to think about people with disabilities in aged care centres and their inability to leave the house during conditions like this. And lastly,
Move an extension of time of 1 minute. Is there a seconder for that? Seconded by Councillor Porteous. All those in favour? Against? Declare that carried. Please proceed.
people with disabilities and mental health issues, people who are older, will have a far greater impact on them from climate change and far less ability to adapt. Organisations like ours don't have the resources to refit buildings to make them safe to be in. And lastly, I think that we're going to see, again, I've worked in mental health for the last 15 years, we're going to see a spike in mental health problems as people start to deal with the anxiety of a true climate breakdown. I would urge the Council to be more ambitious because people need hope and consider bringing forward the year in which we expect to be carbon neutral. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Our next registered speaker is Janet Cossey of Newtown for item 7. Janet?
I'm here tonight to support the sustainable procurement policy. As long-time Inner West residents and ratepayers, my family and I have always valued the caring part in persuading contractor GHD Engineering to rule out Adani. It is likely GHD's experience will have a multiplier effect on other companies that don't want to be climate wreckers and don't want to lose their customers and investors. Enough like this, and with over 60 banks, insurers and others already pulled out, and the mine will never be built. A really important feature of this procurement policy is its balanced approach. 10 years ago, Marrickville Council infamously passed a strong boycott, divestment and sanctions policy against Israel without consulting community groups that would be affected. Its absolute precision left no room for councillors or staff to balance competing considerations. That policy was rescinded for good reason. This policy is totally different. It allows judgment and flexibility rather than dictating that council must boycott this group or pull out of a contract with that company. The draft went up on Your Say Inner West and now reflects the responses and the recent Adani contractor motion. Unlike the Israel boycott that appeared from the blue, this sustainable procurement policy is in line with other policies and projects that are respected and accepted by council and the community. It should be endorsed in full.
Yes, my name is Gillian Raffel and I live in Summer Hill, and I'm here to support the draft Sustainable Procurement Policy too. In early November, I spoke in support of a motion which, as a result of being approved by the Council, made it clear that among other things, the Council, or all things being equal, the Council will prefer to work with contractors and service providers that are not actively working to start new coal and fossil fuel extraction, in particular the Adani coal mine and railway. After that meeting, many Inner West residents have sung the praises of Council for passing that motion. I know that other councils are also considering following this Council's lead. It was a positive statement when other levels of government are AWOL on climate issues. I congratulate the Council on now moving to finalise its sustainable procurement policy, incorporating the content of that motion. As at this very moment, much of New South Wales has burnt, is burning, or is likely to burn later in summer. The enormity of the implications of runaway climate change is in our faces again. That this policy should be passed tonight is very timely. Although the policy as it relates to climate change is not world-shattering in its breadth or implication, it is positive, and right now we need something positive. It is smart because it clearly flags the Council's values and preferences, and it requires prospective tenderers to articulate their involvement in fossil fuel expansion. And yet, it leaves open the door for an on-balance assessment of which tenderer is best for any particular job. It flags to businesses that their response to climate change will be a vital part of their economic success and social licence. This is important in changing hearts and minds, as surely we need to do from here. At this year's Local Government New South Wales Annual Conference, a motion was carried in support of principles-based procurement. That motion made it clear that obtaining best value in the procurement process entails the achievement of local values and strategic objectives, such as giving adequate consideration to environmental concerns. The cheapest tender is not always the best value. I note that the Local Government New South Wales will review the guidance on procurement and prepare a new guideline for councils. I think tonight's draft policy would be a worthy case study for that new guideline, and I encourage the council to put that forward to Local Government New South Wales. This policy will require decision makers in council to articulate how companies compare in terms of a range of indicators before making a recommendation for tender appointment. This type of assessment will be positive because transparency will engender confidence in ratepayers.
If you could conclude, please, your time's
I
expired.
can. So congratulations on expressing your values by action on this important issue, especially in this climate emergency that we're feeling very much today.
Thank you. And the last registered speaker is George Gutierrez of Summerhill.
On behalf of the Summerhill Community Centre, I'd like to commend the Inner West Council on the motion before you tonight to take action on poverty in the Inner West. The Summerhill Community Centre strongly supports this motion. Over the years, we have identified greater financial stress on working class residents, particularly single income households with school-aged children. These households often find it hard to keep up with the increased cost of rental, accommodation, school uniforms, extracurricular activities, cost of living and high utility bills. We learned some senior residents often go to bed before sunset to keep warm without having to switch on the heaters and skip a meal. Senior residents are often socially isolated and fearful to allow anyone into their homes, fearing they will be forced into residential care facilities against their will. So they often reject services that are designed to extend their quality of life independently in their own homes. We often struggle to find even the most basic accommodation for people on New Start allowance. Most boarding houses require tenants to be in receipt of the age pension or disability support pension, as well as rental assistance subsidies. We often do our best to find suitable accommodation in the Inner West area, but consider ourselves fortunate to find accommodation on this side of Parramatta. We have identified undiagnosed or untreated mental health, substance use or abuse, whether listed or illicit, unemployment, homelessness, domestic violence, self-harm, gambling addictions, and intellectual disabilities are amongst the most significant factors impacting on poverty in the Inner West. We know of homeless people admitting themselves into hospital to have access to a shower, meals, and a warm bed. Over the years, with the financial support of the former Asheville Council and the current Inner West Council, we developed and implemented services to address the needs of residents experiencing financial hardship. The Breakfast Club, the Even and Outreach services, the Fruit and Vegetable Club, as well as services in partnership with other non-for-profit organisations like Save Our Girls, are only but a few. Unfortunately, all these services have been discontinued as a result of limited financial resources. We, however, continue to provide information and referral services, counselling services, case management, budgeting skills, court support, domestic violence support, advocacy services, and follow-up support. We strongly urge the Inner West Council to please support this motion and to continue to support the Summer Hill Community Centre by means of prioritising a lease agreement and financial support so that we can continue to care for the most vulnerable residents in the Inner West local government area in accordance with this motion. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, councillors, that brings us to the mayoral minutes, of which there are 4, and you'll forgive me for that indulgence. I have been more disciplined on the Inner West Council than I was on Leichhardt Council about moving mayoral minutes, which I think has been a good practice, but these are important matters. I'll try to be succinct in speaking to them. The first mayoral minute is in relation to the removal of trees along Railway Parade by WestConnex Contractors. Councillors will be aware that hundreds of trees have been cut down over the years throughout the Inner West as part of the WestConnex project. Most recently, Council discovered that a further 100 plus casuarinas, eucalypts and mature figs were to be removed to make way for the walk and cycleway bridge in Annandale as part of the Rozelle Interchange project. The proposal to construct the bridge across Whites Creek near Brennan Street over the City West Link was included in the WestConnex Stage 3 Environmental Impact Statement approved in April 2018. Earlier this year, as councillors will be aware, the contractors briefed council staff on this bridge explaining that the design of the bridge on the Brennan Street side was to be altered and that tree removal was not, we were not informed about that at the time. Council staff became aware of residents' concerns over tree removal at the end of November and contacted the contractor, asking them to postpone the removal, as this would allow for a site meeting with interested residents and relevant staff from the contractor RMS, which has now been disbanded, and council. The contractor's response was that they didn't want to alter their work schedule and wouldn't delay the tree removal. So I'm recommending that council write to the New South Wales Transport Minister, condemning the removal of hundreds of trees by WestConnex contractors along Railway Parade and Brennan Street, Annandale. I'll put that. Councillors, discussion. Councillor Porteous.
Yeah, look, thanks for putting this up. Look, I think the really disgusting element of this as well is the fact that councils acquired a bad name from the community because the RMS has basically said that they've consulted with council and council was happy for this to go ahead. And obviously what wasn't part of that consultation was the fact that they were intending to remove all these trees, which is quite outrageous that they have a consultation and they don't even raise that as an issue. So I think that we also need to emphasise to the RMS that, you know, trees are actually really important to residents and the Inner West, and that if there is an intention to remove trees, when there's consultation that happens, they have to be clearly identified and highlighted that there is an intention to remove trees, so we have an opportunity to respond to that, which clearly we did not have in this case. So perhaps I was thinking the Mayor might consider adding to his mayoral minute that removal of any trees in any future consultations with the RMS be clearly identified and highlighted.
I'm happy to incorporate that. Councillor Porteous, if you could liaise with the minute takers, that would be great. Councillor Passos.
I would ask you not to be so harsh in your language. I would ask, write to the Minister and seek an explanation, because from what I know of the WestConnex, I live close by, that we were receiving information in our letterbox daily, sometimes twice a day. People were informed, and I was really shocked on how much we were informed. So I would ask you to write to the Minister, not to condemn them, to ask for a please explain, and then take it from there. Because I cannot understand that people weren't informed of it. As I just said previously, sometimes we received 2 information leaflets in our letterboxes on every step of the way with what they were doing. So if you could change that wording, I am only too happy to vote for it, but if you leave it as it is, I cannot.
Okay, I'll go to Councillor Hesse momentarily. Councillor Passos, to that end, I will seek to remove the word condemning and amend that to seeking an explanation and cessation of the removal of hundreds of trees. Councillor Hesse.
Thanks, Chair. Look, I support this motion because it actually fits entirely within the draft climate and renewable strategy that will be coming to us later on this evening. That policy, of course, highlights the importance of urban forest and canopy in reducing the heat island effect that's affecting all of our area, and indeed Greater Sydney terribly, and we see it again in days like today. It also points out the importance of long-term strategy, which moves us away from motorways and towards public transport. And indeed, as it says, it starts with how we get around, which is to walk. The motorway strategy, which has brought us the WestConnex, is a strategy of the 1950s, which has been imposed on us now. It's a failure. And the impact on our community, wherever we live in Inner West, the removal of trees is an appalling example of the failure of this government to really look to the future and look to the broader interests of our community. Thank you.
Mr Mayor, one of the key problems I think with the work done by New South Wales Transport and RMS is that they treat this as a work zone. Now, if they're building a highway in mid-New South Wales, of course they clear everything they can and they treat it as a work zone. But here we're right in the middle of residential area. We're in the middle of a planned residential environment, and we're in an environment where the trees have been purposely put there for residential amenity. And these things aren't well understood by major project operators such as RMS and New South Wales Transport. I would hope that in future, when they're doing these sorts of projects in the middle of residential areas across many councils, whether it be in Sydney, country towns, regional areas, where there are existing residential communities, they will consult with the councils who have put a lot of effort and a lot of cost and a lot of resources into creating the environment that our public loves and our public wants, and where these environments are highly meaningful to our people. So I would like to add, if I could, to this motion that we seek that the New South Wales Transport Minister requests that major projects of this scale, any impact on residential amenity or the local environment should be consulted with the local councils that control that area. Thank you.
Well, I believe that was the purpose of Councillor Porteous's suggested amendment, so I'll come back to that in my right of reply. So if there's no further discussion, councillors, Councillor De Cruz.
I think just picking up on both Councillor Stimolis's and Councillor Hesse's comments about the trees, the value of the trees, I think one point that has been forgotten, which is particularly relevant today, is the benefit they provide in filtering out air pollution. So those residents who live along in that vicinity have actually suffered from extra exposure from those motorways, and the private air quality monitors are showing it's extremely high levels of air pollution in those areas. So I think perhaps it's not only the Transport Minister that needs to be corresponded with, perhaps also the Minister for Planning, to ensure that adverse health impacts on residents is also taken into account.
Okay, thank you for that. Just in relation to Councillor Porteous's amendment, can I suggest to the minute takers that it simply be incorporated into the first point, and it could read, and insisting that removal of any trees, etc. And then we've just got one point. It's just a bit grammatically messy at the moment. Councillor Porteous?
Can I ask a question through yourself, Mayor, to the relevant officer? I actually did send this as a question to staff today, but I didn't see a reply. I know that there's a M4, M5 link modification which is currently on exhibition, I believe, until the 17th of December, and I was inquiring with council staff what status that has in terms of us making a submission. Could I have a response to that?
I'll put that question to the officers.
Can we just take that on notice just for the moment? We'll just see if we've got an answer here.
Look, to be honest, could we perhaps add another amendment? And the amendment would be that council make a submission on the M4, M5 link modification, which is currently on exhibition until December 17th, with the draft submission circulated to councillors 3 days before submissions are due for councillor feedback.
Council will certainly make a submission, as has always occurred at every amendment to the project, but I'm not willing to incorporate an amendment requiring circulation to councillors for something that the officers have just said that they'd like to take on notice and get back to us, presumably during this meeting.
Could I just get a clarification then from the Chief Executive
Yes.
Officer that it will be circulated to councillors prior to submission so that we can add benefit, as I have
I'll put that question to the Chief Executive. I'll put that question to the Chief Executive.
As I said, we'll take it on notice, just check exactly what the status is and respond to you tonight.
Would that be normal process that you would allow us to see the submission before it's
Let me just check exactly where we're up to.
I think that question's been answered. There being no further contributions, I'll waive my right of reply and put the motion. All those in favour? Against? Declare that carried unanimously. The second Mayoral Minute, item 21, is in relation to a submission that's been received by Council from the New South Wales Government regarding the Balmain Leagues Club site. Councillors will all be aware that the rezoning of that site has progressed and been endorsed at Council, well, not endorsed without caveat, but it has progressed beyond Council, and that a DA is under assessment. And a submission has been received to that process. In fact, two submissions, one from Transport for New South Wales, another from Roads and Maritime Services, which is particularly confusing given that Roads and Maritime Services was abolished a little over a week ago and folded in under Transport for New South Wales. It's doubly confusing because the information in each submission is different. Transport for New South Wales has raised some concerns, whereas RMS is refusing to give their support to the proposal or to allow it to proceed unless all traffic is diverted away from Victoria Road and into Waterloo Street. That's even more confusing again because under the many previous iterations of this proposal, it has not been the position of RMS that all traffic needs to be diverted away from Victoria Road onto Waterloo Street. They have in fact made submissions in the past stating that some traffic ingress and egress could be achieved from Victoria Road for a development of the site. More to the point, everyone knows that Transport for New South Wales, previously the RMS, are seeking to compulsorily acquire the site as a dive site for the Western Harbour Tunnel, and that a lot of people in the local community are concerned about what the impacts will be from that. I guess one interpretation could be that RMS are putting a different position to Transport for New South Wales because RMS are the body who had responsibility for acquiring the site at the lowest necessary cost. Either way, I don't see how this could be interpreted as anything other than a severe conflict of interest. To put it another way, were a person or a business to be seeking to acquire a site compulsorily, or say the council, and then simultaneously making a submission to a process to have the value of the site devalued, then we would obviously need to declare a conflict, and probably the way the council would handle it in those circumstances, in accordance with our procedures, is that we'd have to outsource the assessment of the traffic impact to some external agency, not council. I really do think it's quite strange that that hasn't occurred, and I think there's an obvious probity problem here. So I'm moving that council write to the New South Wales Transport Minister expressing concern about the obvious conflict of interest created by Transport for New South Wales acting as a consent authority over the former Balmain Leagues Club site, whilst also seeking to acquire the site for the lowest necessary cost, and seek confirmation about what probity measures are in place to ensure transparency about these conflicts. So I will move that way. Is there any discussion, councillors? Councillor Porteous?
I'm just concerned about your use of the word consent authority. I mean, they've made a submission, but they're not essentially a consent authority.
The advice I've received is that their concurrence is required for the application to proceed.
Could I just get a clarification from the relevant officer?
Happy to,
please?
and happy to amend it in line with council officers' advice.
Through the chair, councillors, yes. The consent authority, being council and the panel in this instance, cannot grant consent to the development application without the concurrence of Transport for New South Wales. And
to clarify, perhaps calling a consent authority is a bit of a stretch. Is there a better terminology to use?
Well, I think that's subjective, and my interpretation is that if you can prevent an application from proceeding, then you are acting as a consent authority. So if you've got an alternate wording, I don't want to be, let's avoid being pedantic. Have you got a suggestion about how it should be changed?
Well, I guess it's a compulsory authority that needs to be consulted, and and is, yeah.
I'll
So I
leave it
guess
as
the
consent
consent
authority.
is, they're not actually, providing consent or otherwise for the,
They're required to for it to proceed, so let's call that consent. Okay, if there's no further discussion, I'll put that. All those in favour? All those against? That has been carried unanimously. Yes, the Chief Executive has a response to the matter that was taken on notice.
Yes, councillor, we will circulate the draft submission as soon as we can,
Okay,
and
thank
hopefully at least 3 days beforehand.
thank you.
Thank you for that. Councillors, 2 more Mayoral minutes to go. I'll be as brief as I can. I've recently received advice that the Council's LGBTI working group, internal advisory committee within Council, has resolved and indicated to the Chief Executive their interest in having a rainbow crossing located in Newtown and Enmore. Councillors may be aware that the City of Sydney has already resolved to seek to implement such a proposal near Wilson Street in Newtown, so in the same vicinity at a much less prominent location. And I think, given the fact that the City of Sydney is already proceeding with their proposal, there is some urgency for us to have a conversation with them and see whether this is a project that we could work on jointly and identify one location that suits both councils for the maximum impact. Councillor York has helped me with the preparation of this after receiving an urgent request for Council to start a conversation with the City of Sydney and with Transport for New South Wales. And so I'm recommending that Council note the LGBTI working group has proposed the installation of a rainbow crossing in the LGA as a strong, visible sign of pride and support for the LGBTI community. Secondly, that we note a location has been proposed at the intersections of King Street and Enmore Road, Newtown, outside Newtown Station, for initial exploration of feasibility. That we initiate immediate discussions with stakeholders, including the City of Sydney and Transport for New South Wales, to understand the feasibility and requirements for installing a rainbow crossing at that intersection, noting that the City of Sydney has proposed to install a crossing nearby on Wilson Street at the request of local residents. And fourthly, that we seek further advice and consultation with the LGBTI working group about the implementation of a rainbow crossing at this location, as well as advice about the potential suitable alternative locations in the LGA. So I will move that way. Councillor York.
Thank you, Mayor, for bringing this this evening. I just wanted to reiterate some of the comments that you've made. We were approached by the LGBTI working group with this idea. It's one of several things that the working group are initiating and working on through council, and they have formed a view about a possible location that I think, if it's feasible, could be a really brilliant symbol of the community's support and pride in our LGBTI community, and in a location that I think has both prominence but also significance for that community. Noting that City of Sydney are looking at a residential rainbow crossing somewhere nearby. Wilson Street is not too far. The working group has simply asked that we initiate those discussions sooner rather than later and find out whether this is something that could be done. If not, let's start looking at alternative options for locations in the LGA, which again, they've got some views on. So the urgency here is just to start the process off. I think it's a terrific idea. It would be wonderful to have this symbol. Obviously, we've got a terrific rainbow crossing that was established by the Ashfield Council, established by the community and then supported by the Ashfield Council in Summer Hill. And it would be wonderful to spread that love through the LGA.
Thank you for that. Councillor Passos.
What costing would be involved in this?
Is that a question?
Yes, there's no costings.
I'll put that question to the officers.
Through the chair, it would be subject to design, but it's line marking, which is relatively inexpensive to install, and it could be funded from our existing line marking budget.
Yeah,
Passos.
Yeah, okay. Really, I'm sorry that answer wasn't good enough. And
Councillor Passos, I'll call you to order. The officers provided the
no,
advice.
No, it hasn't provided me enough. and I would have thought there would have been a detailed costings on this Mayoral Minute. And secondly, if we're looking at marking roads and footpaths and making rainbow crossings, do you know how many lines and pedestrian crossings just in Asheville alone that need repainting? Do you know how many traffic lines and signs on our roads in the inner west that need repainting, that are faded? Our speed humps, everything. And now we're talking as a matter of urgency to put in a rainbow crossing. There is no way in the world that I can vote for this, and I know more and more of these type of things will be coming up leading up to the election. Let's be serious here. We have a responsibility on road safety. I can bring a list up to this council tomorrow of nearly every street that the lines need remarking. And you're looking at putting a rainbow crossing as a matter of urgency outside Newtown Station. I rest my case.
Thank you for that. Councillor Kiat.
I just want to briefly express my thanks to the working group for bringing this to council, and I think, you know, in the matter of resolving this resolution, that we should express our thanks to them, and thanks to Councillor York and Mayor Byrne for bringing it tonight. I think it would be great, and I don't think that, thank you, Kathy, for your response. I think that's great that it can be funded within our existing budget, and I think the suggestion that this would somehow cause any detriment to the rest of communities is simply an intentional divisiveness.
Thanks, Chair. I haven't got any problem with putting a rainbow crossing in there. It's not a big issue. We're just painting up there, and that's good for the community to feel pride in what we are and who we are, and we're an inclusive community. But I want this same invitation to be opened up to all the other communities. The Italians, the Greeks, the Lebanese, the Vietnamese, the Portuguese, and we can have crossings dedicated to them as well, in the Portuguese colours, in the Italian colours, in Haberfield, and we can note that we are for everyone, not one group. And I want you to actually open this invitation up to the whole community, not just one part of the community. If you're happy to accept that, I can vote for this. If you can't, I won't be able to vote for it.
Thank you for that. Councillor Lockie, then Councillor Stanmore.
Yeah, look, I just want to say briefly, I mean, obviously I'm going to support the motion, but to the point about the crossings for other cultures and so forth, I do think the Inner West Council does make good efforts in the regard of welcoming. I mean, we just opened up, you know, we're going through the process of renaming Little Portugal at the moment. We are looking at where we can designate as a Little Italy precinct. I think we'll probably see more of those kinds of movements as other areas become well known for particular cultures or initiatives. So I don't see this as being, you know, something that we are doing at to the detriment of other groups within our community. I think we actually make some pretty good efforts to recognise other communities.
My comments are being misrepresented. I didn't say it was a bad idea. I said it was a great idea. I just want it open to all the communities to feel the love.
Thank you, Councillor. I'm going to rule that Councillor Lockie is not out of order with the Code of Meeting Practice. I understand you're wanting to correct the record. Councillor Lockie, please proceed. Okay, Councillor Stanmore.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'll be supporting this Mayoral Minute. One comment I would like to make is that with the Pride seats, Council ensured that one seat was put in each ward, and I think that was very, very important to spread that out throughout the municipality. In this situation here, I think that if the City of Sydney was prepared to put in a crossing of their own, we might have the opportunity to maybe place a crossing of our own elsewhere. That is, we've got great spots, Norton Street, Marion Street, for instance, which have high volume high volume next to Balmain as well, near the town hall, library, our civic precincts.
I'll call the meeting to order. Councillor Stamoulis will be heard in silence.
So I'm suggesting here that we have opportunities, if City of Sydney is going ahead with theirs in Enmore, that we have opportunities then to take them probably to our civic precincts in high volume areas, and I'm sure they'd be most welcome in other areas of the municipality as well. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for that. There's no further discussion. I'll put the motion. All those in favour? Against? That has been carried with Councillors Passos, Rossetti and Macri against. The last Mayoral Minute is in relation to Unwins Bridge Road. Councillors will be aware that we recently resolved in August to write to the government seeking the urgent installation of signalised crossing at Unwins Bridge Road at that very dangerous intersection that we're all aware of. And we've recently received a response explaining that it hasn't been prioritised for funding. And I think we can't let this drop. We need to continue our advocacy, and so I'm recommending that we write to the Deputy Secretary of the Department, Greater Sydney, at Transport, Roads and Maritime Services, which no longer exists. So I'll just amend that to say Transport for New South Wales. If I can just ask the minute taker to make note of that. Highlighting the dangers facing pedestrians crossing Unwins Bridge Road, Tempe, adjacent to Tillman Park, including a request for approval and funding of a signalised pedestrian crossing in Unwins Bridge Road as a matter of urgency. So I'll move that way. Councillors, discussion. Councillor Hesse.
Thanks for bringing this to the meeting, Councillor Byrne. Look, I do thank Ms Richardson for her advice on the former RMS's correspondence in this regard. To say that these are my words, not Ms Richardson's I should say, washed their hands of this matter is pretty disappointing. To say the least. Everyone knows that this is a very dangerous place. Everyone knows that this is where you've got lots of young kids and their parents taking them to a childcare centre. I don't know whether the government wants a number of people killed on this platform, on this crossing or not, but I hope to goodness that it doesn't happen. But we've had people injured. What does it take for the government? Maybe we're not in. Maybe the seat of, I forget what Mr Honig's seat's called actually, botany, maybe it's not marginal enough, but really seriously, this is something that government should jump on. We can't play politics with this. I do ask all councillors to support this. This is just necessary. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for that. Any further discussion, councillors? If not, Councillor Passos, then Councillor York.
Yes, I'd like to ask a question to the staff.
Yes.
What usually happens in these cases? Do we expect the state government to fund the whole lot, or do we usually come to the party?
Put that question to the officers.
Through the chair, it's a combination of factors. Sometimes council will fund these projects, sometimes RMS will fund the projects. We always seek to get grant funding if we can.
Is there any way we can ask this to be, if we come to the party with a certain amount and they pay the bulk of it?
I'll put that question to the officers.
Through the chair, yes, that's an option that council could consider. We might then have to defer other council projects to fund this.
Or maybe other projects that are not as urgent or such a safety concern. Would you accept that, Mr Mayor, that we say that we can always bargain on how much we're going to put in? Let's just see what their answer is. Try to make them feel embarrassed about it. That's how much we really believe it's a safety issue, and we're willing to come to the party with a certain amount.
I'll just confirm with the officers as well before I go to Councillor York. Is there also an issue about the approval from the government in relation to the proposal? I'll put that question to the Director.
Through the chair, that's correct. So it has to meet the certain warrants criteria to approve a signalised crossing. So RMS have to agree to it in the first instance before funding becomes an issue.
So I think it is a sensible suggestion from Councillor Passos that we should be willing, it's such a high priority that we should be willing to work with the government. I'll consider that in my right of reply. Councillor York.
Thank you.
Councillor York.
Oh, sorry. Only to say that I'm sure, like other councillors, I've been in touch with the community there again, and including people that came to speak at the last council meeting when we brought the motion last time, and they have been remaining vigilant and very concerned, and sought advice from local members as well as council again about how to keep this on the agenda. So I think it's, for all the reasons we've discussed, it's important that we continue to push this forward, and that we don't just take the third or fourth no from Transport for New South Wales as the answer.
Thank you for that. Councillor Drury. I'll put that question to the Director.
Through the chair, I believe it's a regional road.
Of the state government. Okay, so I'm a little reticent for us to be kicking in dough on a road which is the responsibility of the state government. I understand the point Councillor Passes, getting lax. I understand the point that Councillor Passes is making, and I understand the Mayor's considering it. I'd ask him to consider the point that if we start offering the state government dough to look after safety on their roads, then we could quickly spend all of our money on their roads.
Thank you for that. Further contributions? If not, I'll make a brief right of reply. Councillor Porteous.
Just on that point that Councillor Drury has made, look, I do know the experience of Leichhardt Council where we have actually made contributions on regional roads for pedestrian crossings, signalised crossings, where we felt that it was very urgent and a high safety issue. So it's not unusual. Unfortunately, the state government really rarely coughs up the full amount when you want it, where you want it. So I think a bit of flexibility is a good idea just to enable things to happen. I think it would be a good idea to us to flag that.
Okay, thank you for that. I'll make a brief right of reply. I'll just state for the record, because these proceedings are recorded, that of course we would consider if the government were to propose a joint project. We've already had one person killed in recent years at this intersection. Our priority is to make sure that people that people can be safe. And unfortunately, at this stage, the response that we receive from the government is not for a joint contribution. It's not even approval of the signalised crossing. So I will certainly show some tact and subtlety in the correspondence that is sent to the government subsequently and offer a conversation and request a meeting so that we can discuss how we can work together on this. I don't think we need to make a monetary offer in that, but we do need to continue our advocacy. So I'll put that recommendation. All those in favour? Against? Declare that carried unanimously. That brings us to item 1 on the business papers, climate and renewable strategy. Councillor York.
Mayor, I was just going to say, normally I would move a motion to suspend standing orders, bring forward the items that people spoke to, but it seems that they have left. Is that correct?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Councillor York.
Great. So I'd like to move the recommendation in the staff report, and including the proposed amendments that are listed in the table, which I think go to a number of different topics, I think all of which are useful additions to the strategy. I'd like to briefly acknowledge and thank the work of the staff in preparing the strategy, which has been very carefully prepared over many months with several studies and commissioned research pieces and significant advice going into, as well as consultation, going into the development of the strategy, particularly the work of Jan Orton and John Steeble in their development of this piece of work. I think it is a strong statement about Council's intention and commitment to strong action on climate and renewables. I view it as the framework from which we prioritise, resource and take the action that's required. I would have loved to have seen us get to a position where we could have a strategy maybe earlier than 2 years since we first moved to have it, but I appreciate the work that's gone into it, and I feel like given the time that it's taken, we do now have a data-driven, evidence-based platform from which to make the decisions that we need to make to resource the actions that need to be taken. So I think that is a good thing. I would love to see us now move our attention quickly to the action that's required to implement this strategy. So, but I would like to reiterate that the targets that are listed in the strategy are ambitious. Moving to 100% renewable and carbon neutral council by 2025 is not a small ambition. It is going to take some significant change in our collective action, behaviour, work to get to that, and some significant resourcing. So I think this is a very good step, but I think we're ready to now take it and move quickly to the action that will come from the strategy. So I urge all councillors to adopt the strategy in front of us tonight.
Thank you, Councillor. I wish to second your recommendation, and I'll speak very briefly to it. I too wish to thank the council officers for their great expertise and diligence in preparing this strategy. It's been obvious to me in the 2 and a bit years that we have been serving on this council that there is a great knowledge base within the organisation in regards to renewable energy and to climate change adaptation and mitigation. And it's been a really good learning experience certainly for myself, and I'm sure I speak for all councillors, or hopefully all councillors, and the community to be able to draw upon that expertise. And the great thing is that we're really starting to see dividends in the work that's been undertaken so far, and I'd like to just highlight a couple of very important examples. Firstly, in relation to the Solar My School program, I'm informed by officers that 13 local schools have now signed up to Solar My School. 10 schools have had the feasibility work undertaken for solar installations on their roofs. The Sydney Catholic schools have identified 5 schools that they would like to prioritise for solar installations as well. So that's huge. I mean, we had no schools a few months ago. This project is already starting to really show signs of great success. The Moree Solar Farm, of course, is up and running and is resulting in very large reductions in carbon emissions and savings to ratepayers. In addition to that, I'm also informed that 2/3 of the LED replacement program in residential streetlights has now been completed. Almost 3,000 LED lights have been retrofitted, which means that we're making another enormous indent in our carbon emissions through that program, and that's been expedited, of course, because of the advocacy of the elected representatives on this council. So there's some really good practical examples of how this strategy is already being implemented. It's not just a document that sits on a shelf. It's something that has been driven by the elected representatives, the officers, and of course by the community. And I think that's something that we can all be really proud of and that we should continue to redouble our efforts towards. So thank you very much, Councillor York. I'm very happy to second the motion. Councillor Kiat.
Thank you, Mayor Byrne. I'd like to reiterate the comments of Councillor York and Councillor Byrne with respect to the work that's been done by our staff in consultation with consultants who are experts in the field. I think that really our community does demand that we move not only as a council but also the community to zero emissions yesterday, really, and particularly now when we're looking at the horrible conditions that we're seeing across Sydney caused by bushfires that are turbocharged by climate change. We really can't act quickly enough, and it's right that we've declared a climate emergency. And I want to thank Ms Harvey and Ms Green who came to speak today. And I'd like to move some amendments to this recommendation, mostly in relation to the implementation and reporting of the strategy, but also with some revisions to the strategy. And I'm happy for those to be dealt with separately and speak to them now. In terms of revisions to the strategy, I want to echo what Ms Green said today. We need to balance what we can achieve with what the community demands. But really, now, looking at the conditions in Sydney and looking at what we can achieve as a council, I think we should be looking to revise the target for council's net corporate emissions to reach zero by the end of 2021. I think that really in our community, particularly those who, with the experience of Leichhardt Council, where they did achieve net zero emissions, I don't think a goal of reaching that target in 5 years would be accepted. And I think that's reflected in the comments of Ms. Green tonight. The second substantive revision that I would seek to the strategy is incorporating the principle of climate justice. And that is simply to ensure that all actions that we take under the strategy are always targeted to benefit those in our community who are disproportionately harmed by the climate and energy crisis. So that is, if we're looking to broker a residential solar scheme, we look to those in our community who are struggling most because of the cost of living prices with respect to electricity costs. Or if we're looking at ways that we can improve heat insulation, we look to those in our community who are most affected by increasing temperatures. With respect to, so those are the two substantive revisions that I'm looking for in the strategy. With respect to reporting, if I could just have some time to speak to each of those points.
Move an extension of 1 minute.
Councillor Portis has moved an extension of time of 1 minute, seconded by Councillor Steele. All those in favour, please raise your hands. I'm sorry, I'm just going to ask people to raise their hands if they're in support of the extension of 1 minute. All those against, that has been carried.
So, with respect, Councillor Drury, those are the two substantive revisions I'm looking for. The rest relate to reporting. So the first is that the executive summary just clearly state what our targets are. I think that people reading this report should be able to look to page 1 and see what our targets are and how we're going to get there. The second point is with respect to how we're going to implement actions under this plan. And really, point 4 here is about, at the earliest opportunity next year, I actually want to get a report from council to council talking about what are the budgetary changes that we need to make to achieve the goals under the plan. Point five is with respect to the point raised by Ms. Green with respect to adaptation measures. I'd like to see that included in the way that we talk about actions under the plan, particularly knowing that, at the moment, childcare centres, for example, can't let the kids outside. Point 6, with respect to electric vehicles, I'd just like an update report on that early next year. Point 7.
Councillor, your time has expired. I'll just allow you some leeway, so if you could just outline the amendments rather than speaking to them individually.
Sure. Point 7 is just that progress reporting on this strategy be included prominently within the operational plan each year. Point 8 is something that's already been adopted at Darebin Council, which is that, as well as financial implications, each item reported to council has a carbon emissions implications section. And point 9 is to reiterate the resolution from 12 November with respect to the brokerage of a solar scheme, and as well with respect to the Empowering Homes program run by the state government. Sorry, and just to say procedurally, I'm happy if any can be incorporated, that's great. And obviously if any need to be voted on separately, I would suggest that perhaps the strategy revisions and the reporting parts can be voted on separately.
Yes, just briefly. I too would like to thank Ms Harvey and Ms Green for coming in to speak. I think their arguments were quite clear as to why we need to bring the target date forward for council's corporate emissions and to aim for carbon neutrality. I think the mayor would actually recall that he was a young councillor on Leichhardt Council in 2012 when they achieved carbon neutrality. With regard to LED lights, some of this technology takes a long time, because I remember advocating for a very long time for LED lights and spoke to Ausgrid, and they said it's coming, we're just trialling it in Mosman instead. So it's great to see that rolling out, and I did actually recognise it on my street, which was very exciting. But I think we do need to take action, and we need to go above and beyond. So as Harvey has spoken about, I noticed that we didn't actually consult the Municipal Association of Victoria, who has actually done the electric vehicle study. And to that end, I'd also like to comment that I went to the Leichhardt depot, which is trialling 4 electric buses, actually I think 6, and they're running on the 470 route now. The project manager for that project, it was so excited because it was using so little electricity to, the batteries weren't even running down on the routes, so they've tried it on longer and longer routes. It was charging more quickly. It didn't need any servicing. So it was really a positive exercise. So I think we really need to look carefully at the benefits of moving to electric vehicles, and away from particularly diesel powered fleet, components of our fleet. And also there's the air pollution benefits, which are huge, and we're feeling that hugely at the moment. Particularly today, which it's astounding, the air quality, and it's being attributed to bushfires, but it's not just the bushfires alone, it's the actual local emissions from motor vehicles and from WestConnex and from the removal of trees down there at the Crescent. So I commend all of these amendments, and I also would like to add, and we can do this in the development of this, but another organisation which hasn't been consulted is Ausgrid, and Ausgrid is doing a project with the City of Sydney where they're looking at demand management, and so I think we need to have a much more sophisticated approach to how we're putting solar panel and the uptake of solar panel. Earlier today I just checked one of the many sites which report on solar energy, and apparently we have got 2 very, very large sites. One is the Tempe IKEA and the other one is the airport car park, which was quite extraordinary. So there is lots of information about where the uptake is, but I think we need to do a lot more, and hopefully if we come with a closer target, we'll focus our attention to this a bit more. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. There's no further discussion. Councillor Lockie. So we've got the amendments from Councillor Catt. I'll go to Councillor York to address those.
So, on the process here, either you take the view that it is legitimate to bring several pages of revisions to a consulted policy without showing them to councillors and staff beforehand, or you don't. You don't get to run that argument on both sides. On the content, I don't support bringing council's corporate emissions target forward, not because it's not important, but because, again, this is not an auction. This is not a situation where we just say different numbers to outbid each other. This is actually about the outcome. Now, I would have thought the Greens would be clear about how carbon emissions strategies work. I would have thought they would be aware that you've got 2 different options you can take. You can either take a structural approach and actually change the structure of how emissions are done by moving to renewables, by investing in different behaviours, by reducing waste, by changing LED lighting, or you can just take the stunt artifice approach and buy a bunch of offsets. Now, essentially what you're saying by doing this is we're just going to buy a bunch of offsets, and instead of using the resources that our well-informed, well-consulted strategy tells us need to go into actual structural changes to get to a zero emissions council, you would rather spend that money on a bunch of paper offsets. That's what you're saying. You've got no information here, you've brought nothing about how this council can achieve faster structural change. So clearly you're not interested in that. Clearly what you're trying to do here is get people on this side to vote against what you think is a better number. It's a stunt. So I will not be supporting that because I see no evidence of how it will lead to an actual better outcome, which I thought we're all trying to achieve here on this strategy. I thought we'd invested a good 2.5 years in a significant amount of money getting to a well-informed strategy so that we could actually affect the outcome for our community. That's what I thought we were on about here. Point 2, I think is fine. Happy to incorporate that. Happy to incorporate 3, the strategy's executive summary be revised. I'm just going to ignore the timing because it seems that's what we're all doing this evening. So that the targets are clearly stated up front, I think that's fine. I'm not happy to incorporate 4 because I think it's just a subset of point 1. If we want to come another time at having a budgetary briefing about the implications, fine, but I'm not coming at an earlier target in a backdoor way, so 1 and 4 are out. Happy to vote against them if we have to. Implementation plan, fine.
Extension of 1 minute.
Seconded.
Happy to incorporate 5, the implementation plan. Progress reporting on, happy to incorporate 6. I'm pretty sure the operational plan is pretty well structured on reporting exactly that anyway, but if you want to take credit for it, fine. Council to receive advice under a carbon emissions implications section. I would like to receive advice from the staff about what that would involve and whether it would actually lead to any better outcomes or whether it would just lead to more paper in our papers. So if you would be amenable to changing that to say that we receive advice about how that section might work, fine, but I'm not just going to incorporate it not knowing how it would work. And then you want to reiterate a bunch of resolutions that we've already passed, fine. And 7 potentially, depending on whether we can agree to a different wording.
Okay, so we'll vote on points 1 and 4, which become the Kiat de Cruz amendments. We'll vote on them separately. If we could just scroll up to point 1. I'll ask the minute taker to scroll up to point 1. Well done. So
My understanding is that was not a right reply because you did not say it was a right reply because I was still intending to speak. And I wanted to ask a question as well, so.
Well, I didn't have any others. No other speakers had indicated their wish to speak on the amendment.
Point of order, Mayor. Just, we have been following the process where amendments are moved. We then treat that as a separate debate.
We just did.
Yeah. Well, then I would at least have a right of reply to the amendments. Yeah.
Okay. We'll go back to you. That's a fair point.
Can I ask a question first of all?
Sorry, I'll just clarify. There is no right of reply to an amendment. It's only to the primary motion. However, Councillor, given we haven't voted on the amendments and Councillor Porteous wishes to speak to the amendments, knock yourself out.
No, I wanted to ask a question first of all to the relevant officer. On the, well, in our papers, it's on page 24, we talk about, in response to the climate emergency, would Councillor Passes, can you be quiet? No. I have the floor.
Come on, guys. Last meeting of the year. Councillor Porteous has the floor.
Thank you. Okay, page 24, it says, in response to climate emergency, Marion West 2036 aims to achieve an ecologically sustainable inner west, which is zero emissions community that generates our own clean energy. So here it talks about the zero emissions community, but then on page 48, targets 2036, it talks about community emissions are 75% less than 2017. It seems to contradict. I just wanted to get a clarification on that.
Okay, I'll put that question to the officers.
Sorry, councillor, I couldn't hear which pages you were referring to. Do you
Okay,
mind
so
saying?
it's basically the executive summary, then the next page is our inner west, which here in our papers is page 24.
Yes, I have that, thank you.
So where it says, the second paragraph down, it says in response, and you'll see the first dot point there, achieve an ecologically sustainable inner west, which is zero emissions community that generates and owns clean energy, yeah?
Yes, thank you.
And then on page 46, key focus areas in a West community carbon emissions, it talks about the target for 2036 being community emissions are 75% less than 2017. So I was just wanting a clarification as to, they seem to contradict each other, but maybe they...
Put that question to the Chief Executive. Can be taken on notice if necessary.
So, councillor, the reference on page 24 is the feedback from the community of what they are hoping we can anticipate, and on page 46, I think I've got this right, is the target that council is proposing to set.
Okay, so just, because I'm reading that page 24 as the target, so that's not the target, is what
Put
you're
that
saying.
question to the officer.
That's my understanding, councillor, that's right.
Okay, Councillor Portis, you have the floor.
Okay, well, number one, I'm actually quite concerned about that because I don't think it's clear in the document. I'm reading this and thinking, okay, so zero emissions community by 2036, that's the target, that's the goal that we're working towards. But now I'm being told, no, that's not the goal that we're working towards. It's community emissions are 75% less than 2017. So I don't think it's clear in the document which is the target there actually. Don't think it's clearly, and I understand how it could happen. It's just that I think it really needs to be clear in the document.
So councillor, perhaps if I can assist, on page 24, it's clear that the community strategic plan at the beginning of the first paragraph identifies the community's vision of what they're hoping for. Again, just to reiterate, the targets that have been out to extensive consultation are the ones that council is intending to achieve. They're different groups seeking to achieve targets, but you know, we can sort that out if you want to.
Okay.
Any substantive remarks?
Yeah, look, one, I think we need to be clear as to what it is we're actually trying to achieve, and I think the better goal is to what the communities seek. If that's the community's proposal, it'd be zero emissions by 2036. We should at least be aiming for that as our goal, and we should be really clear that that is what our goal is, if that is what our goal is. In terms of the bringing the zero corporate carbon emissions target to 2021, I actually think that's really important. I mean, having been the councillor and mayor who particularly drove Leichhardt Council to our zero carbon emissions for 2012, and knowing that that was a really difficult thing to do in 2012 because there were so many obstacles in doing it. I have to say that it was credit to the council staff to be able to achieve that. But it's doable, and when you set a strong target, then you work towards that target. I don't think that it's the role of councillors to have to know the minutiae about how we achieve something, but I do think that we have to set ourselves stretch goals. We have to set goals which, you know, we are in a climate emergency, and to say something that in fact has largely already been achieved by at least one of the three councils was going to take another 5 years to achieve. I don't think that's enough, really. I think it's not stretching us enough. We have to do more. Otherwise, we're declaring a climate emergency, and we're not really doing much about it. So I actually think we need to be a lot more courageous and a lot more assertive in what it is that we want our council staff to do. And setting a target of 2025 is really not doing the business as far as I'm concerned, and I would say as far as the Greens are concerned as well. So I think it's pretty important that we actually amend that to a 2021 target. And I also think that if there is this anomaly here, we should also be making it clear that what we're intending here is that the target in terms of the community is 2036 for a zero emissions community. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for that. Councillors, are there any further amendments or anyone who wishes to speak against the substantive motion? Councillor Macri.
Yeah, Chair. I'm a little bit torn here because...
Sorry, I just got confused momentarily. So we will deal with the amendment first.
We're going to do the amendments and then we can talk on the motion.
Yes.
Yep.
Okay, no further, no one else to speak against the amendments? Okay, well, we'll deal with the Kiat de Cruz amendments. I'll put the first one, which reads, consistent with Council's declaration of a climate emergency, etc. I'll put that. All those in favour, please raise your hands. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. All those against? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. 8, 9. That has been defeated. I'll put the second Kiat de Cruz amendment, which reads, Council receive a report on the budgetary options for implementing actions, etc. All those in favour, please raise your hands. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. All those against? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. That has been defeated. We'll return to the primary motion and Councillor Macri wishes to speak to it.
Chair, yeah, I'm glad that we spent the time discussing the issues with the actual policy, but I'm comfortable with the actual policy the staff have put forward. I'm just not sure on the number of amendments that are going to go in. I mean, assistance for people renting, living, lobby policy changes. I mean, they're sort of laxadarial. I don't know what you're going to do, what you're going to lobby. There's no description of what that process will be. I mean, if you haven't got solar panels and things like that, there's an opportunity for you to buy green power anyway from someone else's solar panels. So those options are available to people, and a lot of people do that in the inner west, and maybe that's why there is such a low take-up of solar panels in the inner west. People just buy green power themselves. And there's some issues here. Installing solar panels in heritage areas, we can handle that sort of quite easily. And the stuff on the trees, well, we're out the jury on that at the moment. And, we all support more trees and better trees, but sustainable trees. So that's not too bad. But the big heavy hitters for me is electric vehicles. I mean, I'm considering purchasing one myself and I support that. I don't know what position or what impact that's going to have. I don't want to say I'm going to do something if someone comes back with a report and tells me we can't afford it. And I'm definitely not sure about what the impacts are for known to natural gas. I've got no information other than a line saying, oh, you can do this. And I struggle going on that, just taking those things on board. Extend fossil fuel divestment. Well, that's great, but we're still using the fossil fuel, so maybe that ties in with getting the electric vehicles. I get that. But I'd like to move the original policy without any of the amendments. Go on record saying I'm moving the policy.
So Councillor Macri will move a foreshadowed motion, which is the officer's recommendation.
Yep.
Is there a seconder for that? Seconded by Councillor Passos. Councillor Hesse.
Thanks, Chair. First of all, I'd like to say thank you to the CEO for bringing this to us and the staff who brought it together, particularly Mr. Steeble, of course, and Jan Orton, who I understand is about to leave the organisation. And I might just take this very brief opportunity, given it's the last meeting of the year, to show my respect to Jan and her team, because I know she's highly regarded amongst the staff of this council in her area and beyond, and in our community. I know everyone who's been touched by Jan has the greatest respect for Jan and the commitment she's shown, particularly the former local government area of Marrickville, but of course the new Inner West Council. And she's been an exemplary public servant, and I know wherever she goes in the future, she will bring the energy and acuity. Because I was on Marrickville Council, Councillor Passos. And I'm disappointed about that intervention. It's unnecessary. I think it's important for us to be generous to the great staff we have at this council. To the policy, I mean, I understand that people rightfully are very passionate about how we go forward, and there'll be emphasis differences between us, but I think the majority of the council certainly are of the mind to take forward a progressive policy. And I think one of the speakers, and I do thank all the four speakers, I guess, who spoke on this broad issue tonight, mentioned the psychological impact of this. I've been chatting to people recently about their disappointment in government and democracy. And I think that this is an example where we can't at local government level change the world, but we can show an example that gives our community leadership, because we do what we can and we effectively put pressure on the other levels of government who I think have failed pretty badly. It's local government who are leading on this debate and continue to lead on this debate. And I think all those of us who are going to support this tonight deserve the pat on the back, no matter which side we stand on. And I thank Councillor York for her engagement with the amendments that Councillor Keart brought forward. I think that was done in a spirit of generosity, and I think we can try and work on that, because I think that's what our council wants. I think to pick up on one particular issue just briefly, another one is the issue of social equity. The report doesn't give it a prescription for it in detail, but I think that is one of the challenges about how we engage with our community on an issue which is vital. Many people think they can buy their way out of the crisis we're in, but we also need to look after those people for whom that's not possible. I think this policy is flagging that, and that's the kind of framework we need to develop council policy further, and also it sets the way we engage other levels of government. So I commend the policy and the amendments put forward to all councillors. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Councillor Stamos.
The one thing that I think seems to be missing from the report is the level of financial commitments that council's making in the policy, and I think that's good news for our community. They want to know that we're making substantial and real commitments to the climate and renewable strategy. And I note in the financial implications section of the report that we have costed to a detailed level the action items for the plan. And in fact, two will be coming shortly as well, and that is the Ausgrid lights and the transition to the low emissions fleet. So my amendment's going to be that council to incorporate in the report broad level financial commitments in the climate and renewable strategy. So that it's council to report broad level financial commitments in the climate and renewable strategy. Thank you.
I'm not sure what that means, but I'll ask you to provide the wording to the minute taker, and we'll then deal with the Stanmore amendment before going back to the substantive debate. Councillor Stanmore, do you want to provide the wording so that councillors can consider it? What's that?
Just a summary table about
Yeah, you'll need to provide the wording to the minute taker. We'll go on with the substantive debate while we're waiting for Councillor Stanmore to provide the wording of that amendment. Councillor Passis.
Yes, through you, Mr. Mead.
Yes.
I'm just getting up to the numbers here. How many responses did you receive?
I'll put that question to the officers.
Altogether, I see 72 here from individuals, 9 from organisations. How many are in the organisations? And a petition signed by 103 people.
I'll put that question to the officers.
Typically, Councillor, we don't know how many people are in each of the organisations. Some can be small, some large.
Well, all I can say is I don't think our residents are too concerned about all this. I think I received more telephone calls and people contacting me and concerned about the cost to go to the swimming pool. So I don't think this is something that we've spent nearly more than half an hour on. So I'll be voting against it. We're talking here about heritage. I know that's going to be very problematic. Depends on what way the house is facing. If it's not facing the right way, you can't have solar panels. This is a dog's breakfast. But you're all sounded good tonight. You've all got your background in climate change and all your scientific classes you attended. All sound very intelligent. That does nothing for our residents. does nothing for the municipality, and I'll be voting against it.
Okay, thank you for that. We'll just go back to the Stamlos amendment if it's now been recorded with the minute takers. No, hasn't been. Is there anyone else who wants to speak to the substantive motion?
Just have a couple of words because just to give some data, I had a look because I previously researched the uptake of solar and found that Lake Macquarie Council area had the highest uptake. And I got some data today and it's really interesting. So 20% of dwellings in Lake Macquarie have taken up solar. 11.8% of dwellings in Ku-ring-gai Council, these were just selective, and 9.2% in the Inner West. But it's also interesting to sorry? No.
Councillor De Cruz has the floor. I'll call the meeting to order.
Point of order.
Call the meeting to order.
I might also comment on the actual amount of, and I'm just filling time here, but comment on the actual amount of energy that's being generated. So Inner West comes in at 19,000, Lake Macquarie at 67,000 kilowatts, and Ku-ring-gai at 18,000 kilowatts. So there's a lot more complexity in how we go about deploying solar in our municipality. So I think we need to look a lot more closely at that. So hopefully we will be doing that in the strategy implementation.
Okay, have we captured the Stamlos amendment now? Is it on the screen? So it reads as follows, councillors. Council receive a report on the budgetary options for implementing actions under the climate and renewable strategy in the earliest opportunity in 2020 to ensure it is prioritised in the process of developing the 20... That was lost. Oh, okay, where is it? Right. It reads as follows. That council to report broad level financial commitments in the climate and renewable strategy, i.e. a summarised table. Is there a seconder for that? Seconded by Councillor Passis. All those in favour? You wish to speak to it, Councillor York?
I was only going to say the reason that I didn't want to incorporate it was because I think generally in this council what we do is we adopt a strategy document that outlines the policy in principle, what we're going to do, and then our operational plan explains the budgetary commitments against that. That's what we've done pretty much every other instance. I'm not sure why we would do it differently here.
Okay, so I'll put the Stamlos amendment. All those in favour, please raise your hands. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. All those against? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. That has been defeated. We'll go back to the primary motion. We've had, by my count, 16 speeches on this item so far. So if it's okay, I'll go back to Councillor York for a right of reply.
Thank you, councillors.
Okay, I'll put that. All those in favour? All those against? That is carried with Councillors Macri and Passis against. And I'm sorry to do this, but I am feeling quite weary, so I'm going to adjourn the meeting for a period of 5 minutes. Councillor Macri wants to move adoption of the items within the confidential papers. That's items 15, 16, 17, 18 and 19. Seconded by Councillor McKenna. Is there no objection?
Sorry, can you just repeat that, Councillor?
We're moving the adoption of items 15, 16, 17, 18 and 19, all of the matters within the confidential papers. It's moved Macri, seconded McKenna. All those in favour? Aye. Against? Declare that carried. Item 2, Councillor Passos.
Yes. First of all, I want to object in the most strongest terms that as an elected representative of the people that has every right to put a notice of motion to council, and I expect when it's a lawful motion that it's placed on the agenda. I lodged a motion on the 14th of October and I was told that they had to seek legal advice to see if it was legal. I knew it was legal. The advice come back that it was legal. Then I was told it would be on the next agenda. It wasn't on the next agenda. And
Councillor Passos.
sorry, I've just got someone checking to see if the live stream's on.
Okay, well, let's focus on the debate.
It wasn't on the agenda the second time. Then I was told, we've sought legal advice. Yes, it's a legal motion. It'll go on the next agenda. Did not happen. Then I was told we're seeking more legal advice. Now, I cannot understand. Then we said, first of all, I haven't seen any of this legal advice. And I have never in all the years I've been on council seen a report on an item, on a motion, when the motion hasn't even been debated or put on the business papers. I have never come across this in all my years on council. You go through the Kiama paperwork and it tells you, and we're also told in the report, oh, there's privacy issues. Let me tell you, councillors, what privacy do we have? We have to state pecuniary interest, developer donations, gifts over $50, what financial institutions we owe money to or don't owe money to, how many properties we have. Where is our privacy? Now, I've put a motion up for drug and alcohol testing before council meetings. That motion should have gone on the agenda, debated, called for reports, and councillors voted accordingly. They could have had their say on the matter. The resolution could pass or not pass. But I want to tell you, I have never ever had such a battle to get a straightforward motion on the agenda. And in that time, okay, it's going on the next agenda.
Okay, Councillor, your time has expired. Now,
I'd like an
I'm
extension.
reluctantly going to move an extension of time, but I am going to ask you to address the motion rather than the process.
Well, the motion's
so I'll move an
not...
extension of time
Mr.
of...
Mayor...
I'll move an extension of time of 2 minutes. Is there
Mr.
a
Mayor, the
seconder for
motion's
that?
not there, so
There's no
I'll move...
seconder. Seconded by Councillor Rosidi. All those in favour? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. All those against? That is carried. You've got 2 minutes, Councillor Passos. I suggest you address what you'd like to move.
Mr. Mayor, the motion is
Call
not...
the meeting to order. Councillor Passos has the floor.
The motion's not there, but I will read the motion. The role of a councillor should not be taken lightly. We make decisions and policies that affect thousands of people's lives. We are also responsible for the expenditure of millions of dollars of other people's money. For the above reasons and many more, I will not mention, I call for drug and alcohol testing for councillors prior to each council meeting. A lawful motion. 15 councillors vote for or against it. I want to know why it was so problematic. And as I said, all I heard was we're seeking legal advice. I haven't seen any. I haven't seen any tabled here. And I want to know why a councillor has to battle to put a motion on the agenda. It's totally unacceptable. And we're told 24,000. We've already got costings. Well, I can't see anything that shows me 24,000. Where did that figure come from? I think we're very, very trusting how we accept everything that's put in front of us. So I want to know where the 24,000 comes from. Did we tender? There was no resolution. Did we call for expressions of interest to get to that amount? So, councillors, I move in an amendment. I move that motion. The ball's in your court. You either vote for or against it. Do I have a seconder for my amendment to put this motion up?
Well, so Councillor Rossetti is seconding what will become the primary motion.
This motion here.
Yes.
That this will be the third time it's been submitted.
Okay. It's being tabled. Now, so you've provided that wording to the minute taker, is that correct?
Yes, the minute taker's got a couple of copies, but I'll give another one.
Okay, thank you for that.
Mate, you've got it. Oh.
Okay, we've got it.
Good, you've got it, but it's not on the agenda. It is, it's the first line of the report. The first line.
Okay, I'll call the meeting to order.
My motion's
I'll
more
call
than
the
one
meeting to
line.
order. Call the meeting to order. I'll simply note that clause 311 in the section before the meeting in the Code of Meeting Practice says the following: if the General Manager considers that a notice of motion submitted by a councillor for consideration at an ordinary meeting of the council has legal, strategic, financial or policy implications which should be taken into consideration by the meeting, the General Manager may provide advice that the motion be deferred pending a report from officers. 2, provide an officer's comment with a notice of motion on the business paper.
Never got that.
3, provide a recommendation with a notice of motion on the business paper.
Never got that.
I'll call the meeting to order. That the matter be deferred pending a report from officers.
Never got that.
If in the opinion of the General Manager, a report needs to be presented to Council to assist councillors with consideration of the notice of motion, and if time permits, the General Manager may include a report in the business paper. So
Never got that.
We've got a primary motion from Councillor Passos, which is seconded by Councillor Rossetti. Do you wish to speak to it?
I would just like to ask a question
Yes.
to you.
Yes.
How did we get the $24,000?
I'll put the question to the officers.
Through the chair, as we detailed in the report, the only council has considered this is Kiama Council. I rang Kiama Council and asked them whether they had looked at the cost of drug and alcohol testing, and the $24,000 came from who they'd spoken to, a company that specialises in this, and it worked out at about $1,200 per meeting to have 15 councillors drug and alcohol tested. So we have about 20 meetings a year, so that works out the figure of $24,000 per year.
Thank you for that. Councillor Kiat.
I haven't finished.
Well, you have. Your time's
I'd
concluded.
like to move a foreshadowed motion that we receive and note the report.
Councillor Kiat is moving that we receive and note the report, and he's withholding his right to
No,
speak.
I'd just like to say, with respect to the comments made about the staff, I'd like to reject what's being suggested, that the staff have acted improperly. I think it's unfortunate that their time has been wasted on this item. Obviously, it has no support from councillors. No.
I did not go after staff. I stated a fact what I went through from the 14th of October.
And I'm sorry.
I stated facts.
Councillor Kiat, you've concluded your remarks. Thank
I
you.
will
That's
take no more
excellent.
time.
Thank you. Is there a seconder for that? Seconded by Councillor
Point of order.
McKenna.
Point of order. If Councillor Cat wants to speak for 3 minutes, he has the right to speak for
I
3
know,
minutes.
but we'd all agreed not to blow the matter up and just get it dealt with. Seriously.
But if he wants to
He
speak,
just
let him
indicated he's
speak.
concluded
No.
his remarks. Councillor
Okay.
McKenna seconding the foreshadowed motion. I'll go to Councillor Passos for a right of reply.
Councillors don't have a problem when they're pulled over by the police to be drug and alcohol tested. When they're driving along, driving home from work, driving anywhere, they don't have a problem. They comply with the police. They pull over, they're tested, go on their merry way, or go in for more testing and charged. This is going further. This is not stopping where it is. The battle that I went through to put a straightforward motion. I've contacted the Office of Local Government. Yes, Councillor Drury, you can laugh. You can laugh. This is serious. The motion's serious and the way that it's been handled is serious. I was elected just like you, even though it absolutely killed you that I was. And I have every right to put forward motions and they're to be respected and treated like every other motion that's put up at this council that does nothing for the municipality. You know what prompted me to put this motion up? Time and time again, residents come up to me about decisions made on this council, and you know what they say to me? What are they on up there? How did they make that decision? What are they doing? Oh, you think it's funny, Councillor Kiat? Well, good luck to you. Good luck to you if you think it's very funny. I think it's very serious.
Okay, I'll put the motion. All those in favour, please raise your hands. That's 2 in favour. 3 in favour. All those against, please raise your hands. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11.
Must have
Has been defeated. Next item.
Must have something to be afraid of if you wouldn't vote for it.
Additional fees.
But point of order, there was a foreshadowed motion. You still need to move the foreshadowed motion. It was defeated, but...
I'll put the foreshadowed, I'll put the foreshadowed motion. All those in favour, please raise your hands. It's 11 in favour, 12 in favour. All those against?
Of Kiat's motion.
Councillor Rosidi and Councillor Passis are abstaining, which is a vote against. That has been carried. Next item, item 3, additional fees and charges, 2019-20. Can I indicate my wish to move a motion which I've been advised from council officers about in regards to the fees for swimming clubs. I'll provide that wording to the minute taker momentarily, but I think it's worth providing just a little bit of context prior to doing so. Councillor Macri had alerted the council to the fact that it was apparently, and we've now been advised that this is the case, illegal to waive fees without having that waiver incorporated into the fees and charges, which had been the long-standing practice at Leichhardt Council. In relation to Dawn Fraser Pool and Leichhardt Pool. So council officers gone away, developed a policy which we deferred when we adopted the other fees and charges because we wanted to see what the comparison was with other councils, and we've now received that advice, and we're being asked to adopt the proposed fees and charges in relation to swimming pools tonight. We've received submissions from the water polo clubs who are incurring a significant increase in their costs, that they are satisfied that the system that's being proposed is fair and that they don't quibble about the fees being charged. Leichhardt Swimming Club has expressed concern that the approximately $1,900 that would be imposed on them through the new policy will have an adverse impact and one that they would like to avoid, and they note that that there is a fee charged already to people who enter the pool when they come along to swimming training. We've also received advice that there's a mix of different systems at different councils, but the majority of councils don't charge a fee to swimming clubs for use of lanes, but they do charge entry. So I'm going to propose that we further reduce the fee, that we differentiate the fee being charged to swimming clubs from that which is charged to water polo clubs, and I've consulted the officers about the wording of this amendment to the recommendation. So I'll move the primary motion with an amendment incorporated, and that we reduce that to 20, the fee for swimming clubs to 20% of that which is charged to water polo clubs. So by any measure, that would then mean that the fee that's being proposed under the primary motion will be peppercorn, nominal, so it'll be $1 per lane, rather than $5 per lane. So the total cost impact to Leichhardt Swimming Club will be an estimated $400. I think that's a way to keep the integrity of the policy, to uphold our legal responsibilities, but reducing the impact on the swimming club to almost zero. and so I will propose that as a primary motion. And Councillor Macri had indicated to me that he wishes to move the officer's recommendation.
Order. I've had my hand up, and so has Councillor Passes. And, no, and you can't move somebody else's motion.
No, I'm not. I'm just going to Councillor Macri because he got my attention before. So I'll move that as the primary motion. I'll go to Councillor Macri.
Thanks, Chair. I think it's important that we get it right and we get equity for everyone who uses our facilities, and it goes right across the board as far as there's no cost recovery on any of these people that do use the facilities, but they're no different from soccer players, football players, hockey players, anyone that uses a sporting facility, whether they're badminton, netball. There's got to be some level of recovery to help us and assist us maintaining these facilities. And it makes a small impact to those clubs compared to the benefit they're getting. And they're being supported. They're being supported very well. I mean, the reason we're in this position is because we're acting contrary to our policy. We've moved, there's been unlawful motions moved since 2012 by Leichhardt Council. Unlawful. I mean, really. I mean, you can't expect people to follow the rules you set if you can't follow the rules you set for yourselves. It's just unsustainable. And that's why I actually wanted this motion brought up and the actual correct fees charged, because the community will benefit from this. And I think everyone is entitled to the same equitable experience at all our facilities. Thank you.
Just one moment. So, Councillor Macri, you're moving the officer's recommendation unamended as a foreshadowed motion? Okay, thank you for that. Councillor Passes.
Yes, well, I don't believe that young children learning to swim or in clubs should have to pay any increase. And I want to ask a question to the appropriate officer through you, Mr. Mayor. This was raised a fair while ago. Have the polo clubs been paying?
Is that a question through the chair?
Yes.
I'll put that to the officers.
Through the chair, councillors, the water polo clubs are yet to be invoiced because of councils were still in limbo land in effect on the fees and charges, so we're yet to invoice them.
Thank you for that.
It's appropriate that they would be back invoiced, back to.
Thank you for that, and I think that's totally wrong for what's been going on here. This was raised a fair while ago. There was no way that the polo club from Leichhardt should have had fee waivers. It was brought to the attention of council that it had to go out for expressions of interest. That didn't happen, and I was led to believe that the polo club's been paying since. Well, apparently for nearly 8-9 months they haven't been paying. So let's hit the swim clubs over the head. Let's try to recruit the money from the swim clubs, the young kids. Totally unacceptable. I'll be lodging a complaint about this. We've got polo players well heeled. Go down and see the cars they drive, which, me being a Liberal, I don't think it's a big deal. But Labor and Greens that are supposed to be there for the battler and the families, you don't have a problem with that. That waiving fees for polo players... Well, if you can't pick up what I'm talking about water polo, you've got a problem, son.
Councillor Passes has the floor.
Because we're talking about swimming pools.
Councillor Passes, I'll ask you to address the motion. I'll call the meeting to order. Councillor Passes has the floor.
So I will not be voting for this, and I will be keeping this agenda to tell the residents out there, this is how your council, Labor and the Greens, that look after family members and that worry about children and that want to help the battler, this is what we do. We hit them over the head, but we leave the grown-up polo players off. But let's forget about how long they haven't paid in Leichhardt, which I'll be following up. I would like to know if the same thing happened at Ashfield for years and years. Seeing that we're spending nearly $50 million to give them a brand new venue at Ashfield Pool, no hydrotherapy pool, We're a very, very well socially progressive inner west council. You know what we are? We are a bunch of hypocrites. That's what we are.
Okay, thank you for that. Councillor Porteous, then Councillor McKenna.
Thanks, Councillor Byrne. Look, thank you, Councillor Macri, for clarifying that it was in fact yourself that's caused so much distress to the local swim community with the fact that they've been having to fight for quite a long period of time to have what in fact they have had for a long time, in which most swim clubs around Sydney and New South Wales have, generally speaking, which is a full fee waiver to enable them to undertake their squad activities as they do regularly at the local pool. And that's exactly what they should be able to continue to do. It's unfortunate that obviously there was some administrative error where that was perhaps not documented appropriately and correctly by Leichhardt Council, but that can be easily remedied. And in fact, I've asked the staff, is that possible to remedy that with correcting the
I'll call the meeting to order.
The fees and facilities, and it is in fact quite possible, and we are able to amend our policies.
Just one moment, Councillor Passes. Councillor, sorry, just one moment, Councillor Porteous. Councillor Passes, can I ask you to resume your seat?
Put a stop on the timer.
Well, I can't actually chair the meeting when I can't hear what's going on. Okay, thank you. Councillor Porteous.
Yeah. So we can return to the status quo. The status quo basically is that the swim club pay for people to come into the aquatic centre, and they don't pay for the hire of the lanes which they use in the early morning to do their club activities and their squad activities. What I'm proposing is an amendment which has been provided to me by the council staff, and the amendment is that council not adopt the draft lane hire at aquatic facilities, the draft lane hire fee at aquatic facilities, and two, council publicly re-exhibit draft lane hire fee at aquatic facilities, full fee waiver for approved affiliated swimming clubs. This is directed at swimming clubs. It really is about the swimming clubs that are all volunteer based, and to which this would be an unreasonable impost if they are required to now start to pay for the lane hire. And it's reasonable and fair that they return to what they have always had. And I don't see, because we've got a forcibly amalgamated council, that we should be creating additional stress and additional costs for them. I acknowledge the fact that the Mayor has proposed a reduced fee, but I think really the cleanest and best way to deal with this is a full fee waiver, which is exactly what they have had for many years, and they should be entitled to continue to have. I don't see why they should be discriminated against when many other organisations are eligible for full fee waivers. So I hope that councils will see the logic and the fairness of what I'm proposing, and will support my amendment. And I'd suggest that, again, I'm happy for the rest of the motion to move forward, and this would be an amendment to that motion, much in line with Councillor Burns, but it would be a different amendment to Councillor Burns' amendment.
Well, my amendment's been incorporated into the primary motion, so I'll just get some advice about how best to deal with that. Councillor Stanmore.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'll be supporting the Porteous Passes amendment. Now, sorry, that must be the most humorous thing I've said all evening. I'll be supporting that on the basis of consistency. We've received notification from the club itself that the clubs around are in fact adopting the policy that Councillor Porteous has put forward, and why we should be inconsistent with that. We need a very strong reason for doing so. Also, the other very important issue here is that a lot of people using the sports clubs aren't always necessarily high income, and therefore you might look at other options, the other clubs surrounding. We don't want to lose a club that's been going since the early 1960s. We don't want to lose that club or lose membership from that club because there's other cheaper options out there. We should be that option for our local community, and we should draw in people. And from what I've heard, given other situations earlier this year, the club has lost some very, very keen swimmers. Also, those of a very high calibre. The club has lost those people. So they're in the process of rebuilding to some degree, and I think any step that council can take in that direction as well would be vitally helpful to the club. But I think consistency is important, and also being an attractor for swimmers for that club is vital. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Councillor Porteous's motion is substantively different to the primary motion, so that would become a foreshadowed motion were both the primary motion and Councillor Macri's foreshadowed motion to be defeated. It can't be on the books whilst there is a primary motion and a foreshadowed motion, and I'll address the issue in my right of reply. Is there any further discussion?
Just to
Councillor Racidi, yes. I'll put that question to the officers.
Through the Chair, Councillors, I don't have on hand the charges that are levied through Annette Kellerman and Fanny Jurek and the swim clubs down there. But certainly the Ashfield Swim Club, the 17-18 fees that the Ashfield Swim Club paid prior to the closure at Ashfield was $1,140 per year, and it's under the proposed fee arrangement that would increase to $1,225.
Thank you for that. Sorry, Councillor McKenna, I've missed you 4 times.
Mr Mayor, a further question to the officers. If any of these, in relation to the Councillor Porteous suggestion or foreshadowed motion, that there be no lane hire, would that mean there's no lane hire for anyone, or just for Leichhardt Swim Club, or for the water polo clubs? What does that leave us with?
I'll put that question to the officers.
The difficulty we're in, councillors, is that the entire fee, as proposed, must be re-exhibited. If council wishes to adopt a fee that is different from that is exhibited, so that includes the water polo clubs, any other aquatic sporting clubs, it must re-exhibit that fee in its entirety. So what the suggestion is here is that the fee be waived for affiliated swimming clubs, but in doing that we must re-exhibit that fee and charge for all aquatic sporting clubs.
So I'm sorry, I'm having difficulty with, so if Councillor Burns' proposal is adopted, which is the 20%, that would apply to all the swimming clubs?
Yes.
And the water polo clubs would stay the same?
Yes.
Right. But if Councillor Porteous's proposal were to be adopted, it would...
I'll call the meeting to order. Councillor Passis, I'm sorry, Councillor Passis, Councillor McKenna has the floor.
If Councillor Porteous's proposal was to be adopted, it is no lane hire, so would that apply to all of the water polo and the swimming clubs, or just to the swimming clubs?
I'll put that as a question to Councillor Porteous.
Just to the swim clubs. You want to put it to me, but it says not adopt the current draft lane hire fee, which would be the same with Councillor Burns, but to re-exhibit the draft lane hire fee and with the full fee waiver for approved swimming clubs. It's only swimming clubs, it's not water polo clubs.
So no lane hire fee would be just the swimming clubs?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you for that. There's no further discussion. Councillor De Cruz.
So how many lanes are there actually at OPAC? Sorry?
7.
Through the Chair, councillors, there's 7.
Sorry about
7, okay. So
Okay, thank you for that. There's no further discussion. I'll make a very brief right of reply.
Just before you do that, I haven't actually seen your motion up on the screen. Could we just see it, please?
Yep, I'll ask the minute takers to scroll up. That's the primary motion moved by myself. Is there a seconder for that? If not, that will lapse. Councillor Drury is seconding that. So that's the primary motion. The foreshadowed motion is moved by Councillor Macri, which is just the officer's recommendation. Okay, Now, I'll make a very brief right of reply. Firstly, I thank the officers for their detailed work on this. It's turned into quite a convoluted questionnaire that's shouldn't really needed to have been had this much attention paid to it by all of us. The solution I'm proposing is that there be what I think all of us would agree is a very nominal fee, $1, for swimming clubs, which would have a $400 impact on the Leichhardt Swimming Club. But I can tell from Councillor Porteous's foreshadowed motion, which is not on the books but would be considered if both other motions are defeated, that she either sees political advantage in trying to pretend that $400 is an unfair impost, or genuinely believes that it is so. And to that end, I'm going to announce tonight that I'm willing to contribute a $200 donation to the Leichhardt Swimming Club in my capacity as mayor, and hope and expect that Councillor Stanmore and Councillor Porteous would match it with $100 each as well, if the policy that I've proposed is carried, and that would see them not being out of pocket in any way at all.
Point of order, Mr. Mayor. Point of order, Mr. Mayor.
Yes.
Do not accuse someone of playing politics when you are the champion.
Thank you. I'll put the motion. All those in favour of the primary motion, please raise your hands. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. All those against? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. That has been defeated. I'll now put the Macri foreshadowed motion for the adoption of the officer's recommendation. All those in favour, please raise your hands. 1, 2. All those against, please raise your hands. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. That has been defeated. She's responsible for her own motion. Sure.
Just a clarification, there's supposed to be the first part in that motion. I said that a few times. So it should say, the council adopt the additional fees and charges as listed in attachments 1 and 2 with the following amendment. And that's the amendment. That's why it was grouped as originally as an amendment. So if we're now going to my foreshadowed motion, which becomes the primary motion, that's how it should read, because that's how I said.
We'll put that. Is there a seconder for the foreshadowed motion? Seconded by Councillor Steer.
Is actually not saying, it's saying for aquatic facilities. It's not saying for swimming clubs. My question originally.
This is the wording that was provided to me by the council staff.
I'll call the meeting to order. Councillor Steer is the seconder for the foreshadowed motion. I'll put that. All those in favour, please.
It's supposed to read, sorry, with the following amendment, yeah.
Okay, my mistake. Councillor Passos is the seconder. I'll put that. All those in favour, please raise your hands. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. All those against? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. That has been, that is a tie. And I will use my casting vote to support the foreshadowed motion despite having voted against it, and it is carried. Next item.
Cool. Well, can it still says aquatic facility?
Next item, planning proposal 245 Marion Street, Leichhardt. Item 5. Councillors.
Can we deal with item 4?
Oh, sorry, we're up to item 4. My mistake. Item 4, classification of land, Marrickville affordable housing units. Councillor Kiat.
Move the officer's recommendation with one amendment. This is...
Oh, can I just raise one thing before?
No, I don't. No.
You're not the mayor.
Well...
You never will be.
Okay. Councillor
Yes, hope not.
Yes.
The last item.
Yes.
The last item on page 94, the proposed new lane fees for approved aquatic sporting clubs in aquatic facilities 2/19/20 will be applied from 1st of November. Today is the 10th.
But didn't get up. They won't be proposed. We've resolved not to adopt the charges.
It'll be re-exhibited. It was backdated.
Okay, I'm going to call the meeting to order. We're on to the next item. Councillor Kiat has the floor.
thank you to the staff for bringing this. It's timely, as if we don't adopt this classification, then it will remain as community land, and as I've received advice from both the officers and others who understand these things, that operational land is the better classification to ensure that we can appropriately manage the land as affordable housing. I want to thank all the councillors who were involved in the project, not only to deliver Marrickville Library, but also to deliver these affordable housing units as part of the American co-development. This is really significant. So 9 affordable housing units is basically changing the lives of 9 families. And we know in this city that basically some people just can't afford to live. And as the motion that has been brought by the Mayor tonight demonstrates, many people in our area are living in poverty. So our attempts at increasing our affordable housing portfolio are hugely significant and change people's lives. So thanks to all the old Marrickville councillors and to the staff who've been involved in this project. I would just like to move an amendment that which relates to the way that we manage our affordable housing portfolio, which is for the establishment of an affordable housing fund. Now, we've talked about this many times before, and this is simply to note our in-principle support. I know that staff, the Chief Executive Officer and also the CFO are working on this already, but I would just like to indicate our in-principle support that we do develop a fund so that when we're getting revenue from our affordable housing units, any revenue, and also relevant VPA cash contributions, that we hold that money and we can use it for the maintenance of our stock, because of course, you know, we'll have strata obligations, etc., but also for investment in new affordable housing projects. And I think that ties very neatly with what the Mayor is proposing tonight with respect to addressing poverty in our area.
Okay, thank you for that. Councillor Drury, seconding the motion. Do you wish to speak to it? No? Councillor McKenna.
Just a question to the officers, please. Could you just explain to me, will these houses, these properties be managed by a community housing provider? And if so, does council get a return on that investment on a regular basis, or how does it normally work?
I'll put that question to the officers.
Through the chair, councillors, yes, the properties will be managed through an affordable housing provider. The current arrangements with our affordable housing manager is that they determine the market rent for the premises, so being median rental minus 25%. Council then receives 75% of the market rental, less any maintenance, repairs, and the management fees from the affordable housing provider. And obviously that rent charge will be a mix depending on the nature of those dwellings themselves.
Okay, thank you for that. Further discussion, councillors? Councillor Passos?
Yes, everyone else that's been involved in that has been thanked, but I would like to thank the developer, because if he didn't develop the land, there'd be no housing, and there is no way that council would be able to implement affordable housing for people. And yet, when we speak about developers up on this council, we say it with a disdain and with a terrible look on our face that we don't want development. And these developers, just stop and think, if they weren't there, individual councillors are not going to put their money forward and build these homes for these people. Just thank the developer.
Okay, thank you for that. Councillors, further discussion? Councillor Stanmore.
Question through the chair. What is the use of these units at the moment? Through the chair, thank you.
Put that question to the officers.
Through the chair, they're brand new developments as part of the Marrickville Library, Marrickville Hospital site, and they're vacant, awaiting leasing.
Okay, thank you for that. Councillor Stanmore? No? He's done. Any further discussion? If not, I'll go to Councillor Kiat for his right of reply. Now. I've already taken one compliment from you tonight. Councillor Kiat.
Thank you. I'll thank you for your support, Councillor Drury, and I should have noted earlier that this proposal has been advocated for by the Affordable Housing Democracy Group. I can't recall their name now. And also the St Vincent's Social Justice Group from Ashfield. So I want to thank them. The advocacy from those interested in social justice and affordable housing in the community is very significant in the development of council's own policies. With respect to developers, I hope that one day when our fund is large enough, we can develop projects that are community appropriate at the top rate of environmental and social sustainability.
Okay, thank you for that. I'll put the motion. All those in favour? Against? Declare that carried. Next item. Rates path harmonisation. Councillor Drury. Oh, I've missed one. Planning proposal. Item 5, Marion Street. Councillor De Cruz will move adoption of the officer's recommendation. Is there a seconder for that? Seconded by Councillor Stanmore. No need for any debate. I'll put that. All those in favour? Against? Declare that carried unanimously. Next item, rates path harmonisation. Councillor Drury.
Thank you, Mayor. And I thank the officers for putting this up. I believe we are going to have a difficult time with the rates harmonisation. I think that the briefings that we've had to date show that there are some fairly significant challenges in terms of the very different rates for both businesses and household residences across our local council area. I think some additional time in order to get the best possible outcome is a pretty prudent step to take. Therefore, I believe we should write off to the Minister and take up the offer that she has made, the offer to delay this matter until July 2021.
Okay, is there a seconder for that? Seconded by Councillor Lockie. Do you wish to speak to it? Is there anyone who wishes to amend the motion?
Yeah. Question.
Councillor Kiat.
Yeah, I was very glad that the Minister released the IPART local government rating report, and I know that that has been on consultation through OLG. Can we just get an update on where the process of the implementation, or even the government decision on the implementation of that, of the recommendations of that report is?
In terms of this councillor, we're preparing work in the rates harmonisation area, so that we're well prepared. We would hope to come back and brief councillors early in the new year.
Through the chair, I'm asking about the IPART report that was released by the Minister, I believe, very early in the new Minister's term, with respect to the reform of local government rating. To me, that's really the most important reason to defer this item, not because we should kick it past the next election, but because we really can't reform, we shouldn't be reforming or harmonising our rates until we have in place the new rating system, hopefully, that's introduced by the government.
I'll have to take that on notice and we'll come back.
Okay, thank you for that.
Could I just move an amendment?
Councillor Porteous and Councillor Passos.
Look, just a quickie, but I do think that it's actually it's a very significant issue. It's going to have a very significant impact on the community, and it's very complex as well. So I would like to know what the timeline looks like for it in terms of what is going to happen when, and also what the community engagement plan is, because I do think that we need to be doing good consultation with the community early up on this. So I'd like to move an amendment that a timeline with a community engagement plan be brought to February's meeting so that we can see what that's looking like moving forward.
I'll put that question to the officers. You need to ask a specific question, I'm afraid. Sorry, what's the question? I'll put that question to the Chief Executive.
I think February might be a little tight. Perhaps the second meeting in February we could aim for. It's just there are, you know, our Chief Financial Officer is currently sick, so I'm happy to make it late February or early March. We'd undertake to do that.
Happy to move it to March. Just
To
so we
March,
know
yeah, that'd
what's
be easier for us. Thanks, Councillor.
Okay, thank you for that.
Yes, I'd like to ask a question to
some will pay more, some will pay less. That's the problem. And it's trying to make sure that those processes are in place evenly across the different rating areas, including commercial and residential, plus the issues that Councillor Couch raised about the IPART reform and ratings more generally.
Well, following on with another question,
Yes.
if it doesn't matter what area that it is, if they're receiving the same services, why aren't the rates the same amount in the three local government areas?
And that's what we're working towards as part of this process.
Okay, thank you for that. Councillor Passos. No? Okay, no further discussion. I'll go to Councillor Drury. I'll put the motion. Move Drury, seconded Porteous. All those in favour? Against? Declare that carried unanimously. Next item, Sustainable Procurement Policy. Councillors, Councillor McKenna.
With several changes to the recommendation. So, can I have that up there?
Councillor McKenna is requesting that the amendments that she's provided to the minute takers be provided on the screen.
Right, so that to add to
Call the meeting to order. I'll go to Councillor McKenna, who has the floor.
To add to the policy, that council will preference local suppliers. I think that one can come out. Organisations that employ people with disabilities and Indigenous suppliers or people that come from disadvantaged communities where possible, where other factors are equal and reasonable comparative market rates are offered. Secondly, I would, the next part of the, that I'm suggesting, replace the section referencing the International Labour Standards with the following simple statement, which I can't see. Can we move it up a bit more? That council will only engage suppliers who act in accordance with Australia's industrial relations laws and awards, probably awards agreements. And then the next part is to defer the implementation of the Adani boycott pending receipt of responses from affected suppliers whom council has written to regarding the matter and legal advice about the legal consequences of the boycott and how it relates to the Local Government Act and other legislation.
You're going to speak to the matter, Councillor?
As I'm moving. Pardon?
You're going to speak to the matter?
I think it's pretty clear. Adopting the policy with those additional points, please.
Thank you for that. Councillor York, are you seconding that? Okay. Do you wish to speak to it? Okay. No problem. Councillor Kiat.
I'd like to move a foreshadowed motion for now with all points that have been moved by Councillor McKenna, sans the last two, with respect to the ILO standards and the Adani, well, I wouldn't call it a boycott. I'd like to ask a question through the chair. with respect to the point on the ILO, and perhaps Councillor McKenna can also enlighten me on this point, perhaps through the chair to the staff, what is the impact of this change?
I'll put that question to the officers. Take it on notice if you need to.
Yeah, I'll need to take that on notice,
Can
Councillor.
I ask a question through the chair to the mover?
Yes.
What's the intention?
I'll put the question to Councillor McKenna.
That's the intention.
I'll call the meeting to order. Councillor McKenna has the floor.
What a question.
I'll call the meeting to order. Councillor McKenna has the floor.
In this country, we work under Australian industrial relations legislation, laws.
Great. Sorry, go on.
And awards or agreements. And it seems very wishy-washy to be saying we're working under the ILO standards. Who really knows what they are? Who around this table can really articulate clearly what they are? I mean, it is whenever we take out agreements, we take out, we look at tenders and things, we always want to know that they're paying in accordance with Australian standards and laws. So that was my intention.
Okay, thank you for that.
So I'll just speak to the or may I speak to the foreshadowed motion?
You may.
Or, I guess, to the primary motion. Look, with respect to that point, my understanding would be that the ILO standards are greater than Australian standards. I know that it's not uncommon that Australian industrial relations laws and awards are changed and lowered. And, for example, provisions with respect to unionisation, the federal government right now is looking at removing union rights, and I don't think that I want to go follow what the current federal government is doing. I'd rather go with ILO. I'm happy to receive further advice on that. With respect to the point regarding deferral of the implementation, with respect to the filter on suppliers who also supply the Adani mine, this was a resolution of council. I'm disappointed that at this point there's an attempt to defer it. I'm not sure whether this is in the nature of rescission, so perhaps we could get some advice on that. But it's really disappointing at a time when we've basically got our whole city shrouded in smoke, the whole state on fire. It has been very, very disappointing to see the response from our federal and state leaders to this crisis. I was following with interest Labor Party conference over the weekend, and I thought a lot of interesting ideas were coming out of it, but I was really disappointed to see that there was a doubling down on Australia's commitment to exporting coal. It's the most damaging thing that we can do now to the world and to our children's future is to be digging up and exporting coal or burning it. So I would really like to see council stay firm on its commitment into adding into the range of policies and filters that we have in our procurement policy, adding in fossil fuels. I mean, if a company turns around tomorrow and says, well, we're not going to work with you anymore because you've got ILO standards or Australian industrial relations standards, or because you've got environmental standards or social standards, we're not going to work with you anymore. We're not just going to rip up our policy. We stand firm. And on this item, I think we need to stand firm. So I hope to see a commitment from the councillors here to say, look, we have to take a stand for our future. We have to take a stand against fossil fuels. We can't just balk at the first resistance that we meet from the private sector, who, of course, if that's their interest, they'll always put their interest before the interests of the community. And we need to put the interests of the community first.
Yes, I want to endorse Councillor Kiat's comments In relation to the ILO, Australia has been ratifying ILO standards since 1932, and there are numerous standards that are currently in force in Australia. They've slowed down a bit under the current Liberal government, but even up to 2017, they have been ratifying various ILO standards. So it's not a new thing. It is part of Australia being part of an international community. We're obliged to uphold Australian law, so we don't need to actually put that in, because that is the obligation of everybody in Australia to comply with Australian law. The ILO standards are higher standards, they're international standards, and they're regarded as gold standards for labour relations, and that is why we should uphold those. Now, in relation to Adani, it's not a boycott at all. What it is saying is that we, as a council, do not want to deal with people who are destroying our country, our reef, our land, our water. And it is a matter for those suppliers to decide which one they'd rather do. They may decide that they would rather stick with Adani because they think there's more money in it. That's all right. That opens the way for other suppliers, non-multinationals, non-global organisations, local organisations such as the ones that Councillor McKenna wants to assist to supply skills for our council. And that would be a really good thing because it would open up the marketplace and extend competition. One of the problems that we have in Australia is the operation of cartels that operate to strangle our market and kill all competition, and then they can call the shots, such as building coal mines that will destroy our country. Bringing in competition, bringing in fair choice, and bringing in ILO standards are simply common sense. They are not radical ideas. They are ideas that are already around and that will actually make this council stronger. It will improve our access to contractors by enabling us to go to a wider pool of non-global organisations, and it will enable us to hold our heads high and know that we are working to help not only the people of the Inner West, but to preserve our environment.
Yes, well, I voted with the Greens last time, as they know. But now that Albanese, the federal member, has agreed and come out publicly and stated he supports Adani, I won't be voting with the Greens on this anymore. Mr Albanese has explained that our coal is a very nice colour, better quality than the coal from other countries. That justifies his reason to have to come out and say it. It's just very interesting what you'll say to try and win back voters.
Okay. Thank you. Councillor Hesse.
Nice colour coal it is now.
The Sydney Morning Herald website tonight covers a story about Councillor Keane. He was Councillor Keane from Hornsby Council. He was the Liberal Mayor of Hornsby. He's now the New South Wales Minister for the Environment. And I quote, New South Wales Environment Minister Matt Keane says, "No one can deny that climate change is to blame for the smoke haze choking Sydney as bushfires burn across New South Wales." Mr Keane, who spoke at the Smart Energy Summit in Sydney on Tuesday, as smoke blanketed the city, said weather conditions were exactly what scientists have warned us would happen. Longer, drier periods resulting in more drought and bushfire, Mr Keane said. If this is not a catalyst for change, I don't know what is. Mr Keane said New South Wales needed to act urgently and have a meaningful discussion about the causes and what we need to do to fix it. Quote, "We need to reduce our carbon emissions immediately, and we need to adapt our practices to deal with this kind of weather becoming the new normal."
Are you telling us the news tonight?
Yep, I'm just quoting your party's Minister for the Environment in New South Wales saying that business as usual doesn't work anymore. I agree with him.
Well, Matt Keane's laugh. He'll say anything.
I'll call the meeting to order.
And
Councillor Hesse has the floor.
I think the point here is that it doesn't matter what party affiliation you have at this point in time, we are facing an existential crisis. Frankly, while I don't doubt for a moment that, for instance, Councillor York, who's rolling her eyes at me, is genuine about her desire to change the climate, I regret that at times she puts her political ambitions above what's actually important. And that, well, I'm sorry, Councillor York, if you find that offensive, but I find it offensive too.
Point of order, Mayor.
Yes, Councillor Drury.
Point of order.
Councillor Drury.
Point of order. That sounded a whole lot like a very personal attack on the credibility of one of the councillors.
Just on the facts, actually. Like, just what? I think you should retract that.
Okay. So thank you, Councillor Drury. I take your point. Councillor Hesse, you'll recall we had some problems in the past with the comments about people's occupation. I'd put questioning whether someone will compromise their beliefs for personal ambition in the same category. It's best not to say it. Please proceed.
I'll take that on board. I think the fundamental issue is that the procurements policy developed for us by council staff is a fine document. I think to attempt to walk back to support a terrible Labor Party position is not what needs to be done. I am going for the motion, Councillor Rossetti. I'm saying we should support the original motion. Well, I'm actually supporting the Liberals Minister for the Environment in this position. He's right. And I think it's actually Mr. Keane. I think Mr. Keane is demonstrating what is actually happening is that those people who can see what is happening, who are prepared to actually say we've got to do something, are a good deal more admirable than those, like the member for Grainler, who are playing the politics of this for all it's worth. We actually need to focus on what's good. I'm not running for election again, Councillor Passos, and I'm quite happy not to. And I think what we should be doing is focusing on this excellent policy developed for us by the staff and supporting that and not winding it back. Thank you.
Okay, come on, councillors, let's get on with it. We've got lots of other items to deal with. So we've got the primary motion from Councillor McKenna, seconded by Councillor York. And we've got the foreshadowed motion from Councillor Kiat, seconded by Councillor Steer. Councillor McKenna, if you don't need a right of reply, I'll put the primary motion, and we're up to the right of reply, so we've passed questions. I'll put the primary motion. All those in favour, please raise your hands. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. All those against? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. That has been defeated. I'll put the foreshadowed motion. All those in favour, please raise your hands. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. All those against, please raise your hands. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. That has been carried. The Greens, Passos, Adani boycott lives on. Lives on into 2020. Wow. That'll be an interesting one at the Liberal Council meeting. So in the interest of saving time, I'll put that. Is there a seconder for that? Seconded by Councillor Passos?
No, I'm not second. I want to speak on it.
Seconded by Councillor Fortius. You wish to speak to it, Councillor? I've refrained from doing so, so I guess you can too. Councillor Passos.
Well, Mr. Mayor, I'm not supporting this motion because this motion is hypocritical in the extreme. There is no way we can make a difference because we haven't even attempted to make a difference previously. Worried about homelessness, are you? You and Councillor Mark Drury. Do you know how many buildings we own that we could house the homeless? And homeless is not the main problem. It's mental illness that we cannot do a thing about. But if it's people that are really homeless, how many buildings do we have? How many times did I bring this issue up on the previous council? Oh, Mr. Drury's walked out, has he? When we had artists in residence at Thurnin Villa, that we also gave them financial assistance to buy their food, when I said, why aren't we housing the homeless in that building? We've just recently demolished a home that was left to us by a resident. The conditions of the will was it had to be a park, but if it wasn't a park, it had to go to a charity. Well, maybe the charity could have kept the house there and housed homeless people. And the 5 years it took us to demolish this home, why didn't we house homeless people in it? We didn't do it, did we? We're talking about underprivileged people. I also tried, and the Mayor knows this, and nothing was done. I was looking for premises for abused children. CAPS, an organisation that's been in this area for years and years. Our council couldn't seem to find them any premises. Their premises were too small, they had to move. For 2 years, I fought for council to find premises. No, these children come from violent homes, but we couldn't find premises. This motion looks good on paper. It means nothing. And I really, really cannot understand how any sincere person can put this motion up knowing full well that we've had every opportunity to address the things that we can do, and we haven't done it.
Okay, now forgive me, but I forgot that Councillor Drury was, I don't know how I would have forgot this, but Councillor Drury is we've both refrained from speaking. So is there anyone who wishes to amend the motion or speak against it? If not, I will plan to make the right reply. I'll put the motion. All those in favour? All those against? Sorry, Councillor Fellas, you in favour or against? Councillor Passes, you amend the motion. Next item. Stanmore Public School, pedestrian safety.
Just really briefly to say that the P&C at Stanmore Public School have been working with the staff there to improve the traffic calming for quite some time, like several years, and at one point had written to RMS and received an assurance that some work would be done in the surrounding streets, and a copy of the response is being tabled with councillors now, which clearly states back in 2017 that work would be undertaken, and essentially 2 years later it hasn't been. So both the parents and the school have sought council support to bring the issue back to the attention of Transport for New South Wales, and that I've also further suggested that we work with the school community to see what we can do as a council as well to assist. Oh, yep, another really pretty straightforward brief thing. So councillors might have noticed, particularly in the Stanmore ward, councillors might have noticed that a couple of our really well-loved and well-used pocket parks in the neighbourhood have been out for consultation for some maintenance work. And I have spoken to a number of residents who live around Bain Playground and around Crammon Park, who are really keen to see that maintenance work done as a matter of some priority. Councillors who are familiar with those parks will know that they are beautiful green spaces, but that particularly the playground areas are fairly degraded. So I wanted to make sure with council's support that we simply note that that work go ahead and that it oughtn't be held up by the processes that the state government are trying to work through with our plans of management, because it is maintenance rather than large-scale works. I think that's an important assurance for the residents who are really looking forward to these renewal works. And then the other proposal is simply that where we can, we seek to incorporate some signage that provides some interpretation of the heritage, particularly community members have asked me, for example, why is it called Balmain Playground or why is it called Crammon Park? And it'd be good to have some of that local history incorporated, which we did, I think, in a really successful way at the playground, at the park renewal that we did on Liberty Street. So I'd love to see that happen if possible.
Yes, Mr Mayor, I'd like through you to the appropriate officer. I have no problem with this motion. I have a problem knowing when the pocket park that I raised is going to be, work's going to start, which I raised about 1.5 years ago.
I'm not sure if that's a question.
Yes, it is.
As previously indicated, councillor, those works will be done this financial year.
Yep, this financial year. And so will this one.
Correct.
Yep, correct. Bang, bang. Straight away done. But I've waited 18 months.
No, they're both budgeted for and...
Yeah.
Okay, the officer's
Yep.
answered the question. Demerger. Councillor Porteous.
Yeah, Mayor, I'm actually going to defer this to the first meeting in February, because there were some people that wanted to come to speak to this evening. Haven't been able to because of prior engagements, and they've asked if it could be deferred until the February meeting. So I'll defer this to the February meeting. I'll be moving to defer this to the first meeting in February. I think I don't have to, I can just defer my own motion.
Mr Mayor. Yeah, Mr Mayor, I'd like to move that we debate this now. If we're going to start doing this because people can't make it, when people are so interested in demerging, I'm pretty sure they would be here.
You don't need to move that it be debated now. It is being debated now. There's a primary motion for deferral. Do you have an alternate motion?
Yes.
What's your motion?
No, deferral. That we address it now. What else do you want?
Well, you're moving to adopt it?
Yes. No, not her, not the motion. No way.
So you can't move a motion for not deferral if you
No,
don't.
I want us to debate it. That's what I said.
Yep, and you'll need to move a motion as to how you feel about the proposal.
I'm totally against it, as you well know.
Okay, Councillor Passis is moving a foreshadowed motion that we that the proposal is not supported. Is there a seconder for that? There's not a seconder for that. That will lapse. Does anyone wish to speak to the deferral motion? Is there a seconder for that? Okay, we'll put that. All those in favour? Against? Declare that carried. Next item. That's it.
Was anyone against that last motion?
Unanimously. Except for Councillor Passis. Come on, this working here.
He's got money right.
Yes, Councillor Stanmore, could you please speak to why this matter should be considered urgent?
Yeah, thank you, Mr Mayor, and fellow councillors. I have a matter that I'm bringing forward to you tonight, and I have no option but to raise it as an urgency motion because it has been removed from the papers, and therefore the only option that I have available to me tonight is to raise it as an urgency motion for your consideration. Now, it's about the meeting procedures, the way that we're handling the meeting itself, the minute taking, and the resourcing of our meetings in general after 10 o'clock. And I see this as an extremely important issue because, councillors, this is our meeting. This is our meeting, and if anyone's going to call what changes are going to be made, and if anyone's going to call what resources we have and we don't have, surely we must be a part of that decision making. So it's a very simple motion that we ask to consider what the appropriate resourcing of our meeting is and decide on how further future changes would be made to it. It's a very, very simple and I thought non-confrontational motion. And why is it urgent, Councillor Hesse? Because it's been pulled from the papers and I have no option but to raise it through.
That's a bureaucratic.
Yeah.
When you explain urgency, you have to actually say why it's urgent now, rather.
Well, it's urgent because we are moving towards 10 o'clock this evening, and this is exactly the situation where we'll be in, where the meeting will not be resourced. We won't be able to see the amendments being put up. We won't be able to see the amendments being put up. As we've seen, we've had motions go up, 3 or 4 amendments. It's very hard to see that when the meeting is not resourced appropriately. So unless councillors have an alternative for addressing this legal and valid motion, then... sorry? That's right. Yeah. Why it's urgent? Because we're moving into, very shortly, at 10 o'clock, we'll be moving into a period of time where... Yep. Yep. Look, very happy. You know the reason why I've raised it as an urgency motion, and unless there's some alternative, I have no alternative other than to raise it as an urgency motion.
Thank you for that. I do think that these are matters that could be considered by council, but the matter is certainly not urgent given we're not due to meet until next February. So I'm going to rule that it's not urgent and declare the meeting closed.
Point of order, Mr Mayor, point of order.
The meeting is closed.
That motion, that councillor tried to put that motion on the agenda. It wasn't raised. Okay, fair enough. Fair enough.
Merry Christmas to all, and to all a good night.
You notice this Aldi bag? These people thought they had it down pat too.